Hey everybody, Kagaming here. So, Classic Plus finally announced Seasons of Discovery. I thought it would be fun to make a video to kind of go through all the runes that there are, kind of give my opinion, kind of look at the talents and stuff like that. For people who don't know, how runes work is that in Classic Plus you will have, at the start, 3 item slots. They will be continuing that, they will make a 4th and a 5th probably, they said. And you can have one of these extra talents per one of these item slots, and you can freely swap them around. So let's start looking at the Druid. So for the chest you have Fury of Storm Mage. This reduces the the mana cost of Ref by 100% and gives it a chance to make Healing Touch instant. Now this is a fantastic rune because this basically kind of balances mana issues. Because they can now just, whenever they're low on mana, they can spam Ref, keep up their DPS while regenerating mana. I'm pretty sure that healers are probably also going to be taking this, just because it looks more powerful than Living Seed. But, you know, we'll see. And then we have Wild Strikes. This is basically Wind Fury Totem, but for Druids. Blizzard said that they would give some of the faction-specific abilities to neutral parties to kind of balance it out, and putting Wind Fury Totem on Druids is one of those initiatives. Now obviously this is super powerful. I think it's pretty much mandatory probably on anybody that runs Feral. So yeah, very good. And then we have Survival of the Fittest. Now this reduces damage taken for bears. I'm gonna be honest, I think as a bear you're probably tanky enough that you want Wild Strikes anyway, because just being like a tank that has a permanent Wind Fury Totem on your back sounds way better than taking a little bit of extra damage. It remains to be seen how hard the content in Season of Discovery is going to be, but my prediction is that Survival of the Fittest is probably not going to see a lot of play. Maybe in PvP, but outside of PvP I wouldn't expect it to win very often. Then we have Living Seed. Now Living Seed, kind of boring, gotta be honest. I think the healers definitely lost on this one. I mean, when you critically heal your target, you put like a little seed with 30% of the amount. I'm gonna be honest, this doesn't sound very exciting. I think most healers are gonna run Fury of Storm Rage anyway. Alright, for the legs we have Savage Roar. Now this is pretty sad, I'm gonna be honest. I do not understand why they thought Savage Roar was a good idea for this. Blizzard has a very long history of balancing Savage Roar and and you know, making it more player friendly, since a lot of people disliked Savage Roar, and in these, you know, in retail currently you just have the option to just opt out of it completely. So I am not very sold on this one. It's also kind of sad that this is the only throughput increase on this row, so basically Feral Druids that want to play Cat are required to take this. In my opinion, what I would have liked to see was something like the Druid Primal Wrath, which is like the AoE Rip, I think, is Primal Wrath. You know, something along those lines, because Feral right now doesn't have any AoE options, I think, because I'm not sure if Cat form has Swipe, but if they do, it's probably still bad. Cat Thrash would also be interesting, right? Get more bleeds up there. I don't know. It would have been more interesting than Savage Roar. Life Bloom, to be expected. I think it's also a little bit boring, but it does add like the reduced global cooldown on Rejuvenation and Life Bloom. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, Life Bloom, it's just a thing. It's a little bit boring. Again, I would have liked to see something a little bit more exciting for Resto, but then again, Life Bloom is pretty strong. Then we have Skullbash. This is Guardian's only option from the looks of it. That's, you know, it is what it is. But yeah, you know, a bit of mobility, having an interrupt, very good. Bear already has an interrupt, right, in the form of Feral Charge. So having Druids now have the option to have 2 interrupts, both on probably like a below 15-second cooldown, because I think Skullbash is going to be like 13 to 15 seconds. And Feral Charge is also 15. If you combine that with Furor, which always gives you 10 rage, which means you can always cast Feral Charge. Man, this is very tough for PvP to deal with. I think, like for example for mages and stuff, having extra mobility on the Druid and having 2 interrupts sounds pretty strong. And then lastly for balance we have Star Search. I'm not sure if this is the casted version or the instant version. I would assume since it's classic, it's probably the casted version. Yeah, it's a simple spell. Deals arcane damage, and it benefits from talents that trigger from Wrath or Starfire. I gotta be honest, we have 2 talents that reduce cast time. I'm not sure that if this is a casted spell, if it benefits from both of these cast time reductions. That might be, you know, that might be interesting. But other than that, yeah, you can expect this to hit like a truck, especially with Vengeance, having the 100% crit modifier. Nature's Grace, very good. I wonder if it double dips and stuff like this, because it's Starfire and Wrath deal 2% more damage. I'm not sure. I'm going to assume it doesn't double dip though. But yeah, pretty decent option here. Then we have Mangle. I'm going to assume this is the TBC version. Yeah, very good addition to Cat, right? Claw is kind of a mediocre ability, so having Mangle here is really good. Also synergizes with the Cat Bleeds. It's again kind of why I wanted to see... instead of Savage Roar, I wanted to see a form of Bleed. Now, funnily enough, I'm not sure what they are thinking about the bear version of Mangle, because as far as I remember, bears don't have bleeds in vanilla. They get bleeds through Lacerate, but Lacerate is on the same row, so they're mutually exclusive. So for bear, this looks a little bit sad, because they just don't have they don't have bleeds. Because I'm not entirely sure, but do they get Lacerate in TBC or in Wrath the Lich King? Because I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, good addition. Wild Growth, again, kind of boring, right? Like none of these are actually new and interesting. They are just like things that Druid has had in the future. So everybody kind of already knows what this stuff is. But hey, you know, Wild Growth is Wild Growth. I think it would have been funnier to have something like Efflorescence, just because it's like visually more interesting, right? Putting that mushroom down and then having it like do AoE healing. I think it's a little bit more interesting than Wild Growth. But again, you know, it's efficient throughput, so why not? Then we have Sunfire. Now this is the only realistic option for balance, and I think it makes it very like dot heavy, right? Because we have Moonfire, then they're probably going to run Insect Swarm, and they're going to run Sunfire. That means you have 3 dots per Druid. It's really good AoE multi-target, I would assume, but I'm just a little bit concerned about like how many dots you have to keep up. Like they have more than Affliction Warlock, you know. Other than that, yeah, they also get like the cat version of it and the bear version. For the bear version, I think it's a little bit moot. I don't think you need the ranged pool because you already have Fairy Fire and stuff. And you can always just shift out, cast Moonfire, and then shift back in. So for bear, this seems pretty pointless. For cats, you know, maybe it has some PvP application, but I think it does lose out to Mangle, I would guess. I don't think this benefits... It doesn't say that it benefits from Moonfire things, which is also pretty sad, because Moonfire gets pretty jacked in this talent tree, right? They get 10% crit and 10% damage, and I'm not sure if they get anything else. I mean, they get a mana reduction. Yeah, they also get a critical strike damage increase. So Sunfire might be pretty weak. Oh, actually, never mind. It says benefits from all the things that trigger Moonfire. Never mind, they included that. And then lastly, we have Lacerate. Now, I think Lacerate is incredibly strong from the looks of it. Because it's a bleed that stacks 5 times, but it also deals weapon damage based on the amount of stacks. So especially on single target bosses or, you know, single target PvP. I think this is incredibly powerful for bears. It probably replaces Maul outright. Oh yeah, it causes a high amount of threat. Yeah, no, I just think this replaces Maul outright, I would have to guess. And it's probably also the reason why you're never going to take Mangle, I think. Lacerate looks incredibly powerful. So overall for Druid, you know, they get some interesting choices. I think Druid definitely had kind of like the short end of the stick, because the majority of these are just abilities that they already have, right? Like most of these actually all of these bottom rows are things we already have from the legs and the hands. The only thing that's new is actually Wild Strikes and Survival of the Fittest. And even Survival of the Fittest is kind of like a modified something that they already have. So yeah, Wild Strike's actually the only genuinely new thing here. The rest is stuff they've had before. But yeah, I think the most interesting additions are definitely Wild Strikes and Fury of Stormrage. I think those are the most transformative, so to say. The rest are just throughput increases. Not that I'm complaining, but maybe could have done a little bit more interesting stuff here. All right. Then we go on to the Hunter. All right, let's go. Chest, Exposed Weakness. Your ranged criticals increase your attack power by 40% of your current agility. Throughput increase, kind of boring, but hey, more power. Master Marksman increases your crit chance by 5% and reduce the mana cost of all shots. Again, this looks like just a math problem. Not terribly interesting, but very strong throughput increases. Then we have Lone Wolf. You deal 25% increased damage with all attacks if you do not have an active pet. Very funny because on stage, Holly Longdale was talking about how, together with Dual Wield, you could make like a mean melee hunter. I don't think she realized that that's you cannot do that actually, because if you look in the next three, right, we have Kill Command, Sniper Training, Serpent Spread, and Flanking Strike. Now, Flanking Strike is the only thing that affects melee. These two require ranged, and this requires a pet. So that means that if you take Lone Wolf, none of these are useful for Melee Hunter. Because I assume you need a pet active to cast Flanking Strike. You might be able to cast Flanking Strike without your pet, but it's still suboptimal. So yeah, I'm not sure if Holly noticed that running Lone Wolf in a melee build is probably not going to work. Yeah, this is just like a very typical marksmanship thing, I would imagine, right? It's for those marksmanship hunters who do not want to have a pet. Very good for raiding, very good for dungeons, I would imagine. And then lastly, Cobra Strikes. Pretty simple stuff as well. When you crit, your pet starts critting. Pretty nice increase. Kill Command. This is not the Kill Command we have in retail. This is actually a different one. And it causes your pet's damage done from special attacks increased by 60%, which reduces by 20% every time they do a special attack. So, just like more pet throughput, just like Cobra Strikes. It doesn't really transform your gameplay other than you press a button and your pet does more damage. Sniper Training. I do not understand why they keep putting this ability in. I feel like Marksmanship Hunter has had this for like a very long time in one form or another. It's boring, man. Who wants to stand still, man? Is that really something that people are, it's like Savage Roar, it's like one of those things that people don't seem to like and Blizzard seems to love. So I don't know. It's here. It's pretty strong as well, right? You get 30% increased crit chance. Imagine having to play this in a raid and then, as soon as a mechanic happens, you just lose 30% crit. Ugh. Then we have Serpent Spread. I love this ability, right? Huge quality of life. One of the things I wish it did was combine with Carve, right? Just to skip ahead a little bit. Carve is like the other melee option. And if they had said that Serpent Spread also affects Carve, which is basically melee multi-shot, then Lone Wolf would have become a lot more competitive for solo play or for petless play, basically, right? Because then you can go Lone Wolf, Serpent Spread, and Carve, and you actually have like a pretty decent AoE melee hunter. But because your only option is Flanking Strike, right, you can't take Lone Wolf, and you're probably forced to take Cobra Strikes. Yeah, you're basically forced because these are also ranged. So you go Cobra Strikes, Flanking Strike, Carve. So you basically have no choice if you're a melee hunter. I wish they would have changed this to also affect Carve. Maybe it does, right? Maybe when you take Carve, multi-shots transforms into Carve. If it works like that, great. If it doesn't, meh. And then Flanking Strike, right? New addition to the game, actually. You do instant damage, and then after that, your Mongoose Bite and Raptor Strike deal 10% increased damage, stacking up to 3 times. And Raptor Strike has a chance to reset the cooldown. Very good ability, right? It changes your gameplay in an interesting way. Gives you some cooldown resetting. And now forgive me if I'm wrong, but Mongoose Bite is only a reactive thing in vanilla, right? Let's see. Mongoose Bite. Yeah, can only be performed after you dodge, right? So in a dungeon, you're not going to press Mongoose Bite. That might be a point that they want to change, because in PvP, this matters a little bit more. But in PvE, your only ability is Raptor Strike. 6-second cooldown on your next melee attack. And if it doesn't reset Flanking Strike, then Melee Hunter is going to feel pretty damn boring, I imagine. So again, yeah, I don't know. They should do something with Mongoose Bite as well. Maybe, you know, put it in Lone Wolf or whatever. Oh, just like one additional thing about Lone Wolf. I feel like they should have also, to make it more viable for melee hunters, is to make traps be able to be used in combat, or at least Immolation Trap, right? Because I don't think Immolation Trap is usable while in combat. Yeah, traps can only be placed when out of combat. I feel like adding Immolation Trap to the mix, because otherwise you're very dependent on trying to use Feign Death, and that using that for Immolation Trap. So I think they should probably just modify one of these things to also include that Immolation Trap can be used while in combat. I think that would be a healthy addition. All right, and then the last row we have Beast Mastery. So this is more of the pet tanking, right? They gain increased health and damage. You know, 30% damage on your pet is huge, by the way. Like, damn. More focus regeneration, and in addition, your pet's growl now also taunts. Now, you might be thinking like, woohoo, more pet tanks. I don't think so, because it doesn't actually modify threat, right? It only turns it into a taunt, which means that your pet still is not going to have a good amount of threat. It's going to get completely outdone by all of these other dudes, especially now that we have these jacked up abilities. I don't think they have the threat to manage that, especially not the AoE threat. I think the only way to really get AoE threat is either getting like a Bird of Prey, which has like an AoE like demo shout, or getting, I think it was a Silverback Gorilla, which have like a Thunderclap, which I think does have a threat modifier. But ultimately, like, it's just too weak, right? They just do not generate the threat, and also it's kind of clunky to control. So in very small, like, you know, if you're like, you know, 2 or 3 players and you're trying to take down an elite, then Beast Mastery definitely works. In dungeons or raids, I would not count on it. All right, Chimera Shot. This is, I think, the exact version we have in Wrath of the Lich King. So nothing new there, but very interesting for hunters in vanilla. I wonder if people are just going to sit on Serpent Sting all day, or if Viper Sting might actually see some play here, because you get to restore mana. That would be pretty interesting. And for Scorpion Sting, right? Very good for PvP. Overall, pretty competent, nice ability. Then we have Explosive Shot, which replaces Arcane Shot and just deals a little bit more damage. I do think it's very flavorful, but I also think it probably gets outdone by Chimera Shot. Because Explosive Shot replaces Arcane Shot, right? Because it shares a cooldown. And it just deals more fire damage. It's not even AoE, right? It's single target. It's the old Explosive Shot. So for flavor, it's super cool. For usefulness, it's not very useful, I would say. There might be something I'm overlooking, but in general, I don't think you will ever play Explosive Shot. I think you'll stick to Chimera Shot. And then lastly, Carve. We've already kind of extensively talked about Carve. Deals 50% weapon damage in front of you. One of the things that is interesting is that it's uncapped AoE. A lot of the other characters do have some form of capped AoE, but not hunters, so this is probably going to be pretty good. So overall for hunters, good throughput increases, some interesting options, right, like Serpent Spread and Carve, so they're probably going to be pretty damn good on AoE. And then we have Chimera Shot and Lone Wolf for Marksman, right, so I think Marksmen are going to be very happy about that. And also just like expose weakness, Master Marksman. A lot of good stuff here, but nothing like super exciting, but just, you know, more competency in your talent tree, I suppose. All right, on to mages. Now, as you may have heard, mages are going to be able to heal, which is a very big change and very exciting. Now, they heal in very much Atonement Priest kind of way. They have 2 abilities here. They have Regeneration and they have Mass Regeneration. Now, both of these function kind of the same. They are 3-second channels, so kind of like a Mind Flay on your target. And you heal them over time. And from the first tick onwards, you apply Temporal Beacon. And Temporal Beacon is basically your atonement. It means that when you do arcane damage, it gets converted. Now it's important to realize that 100% of arcane damage gets split among all your beacon targets, right? That means the more beacons you have out, the less healing each individual receives. But on single target or maybe on 2 target, this is incredibly powerful. From what I've seen people play on the BlizzCon beta, right? Regeneration itself is just a very powerful heal, so I'm not sure if that's going to make it all the way to the end. But on top of that, right, it's also, you know, pretty powerful healing wise like this. On top of that, for PvP, this poses a massive issue, I think, because this counts, the channel is arcane. Now that means that if you are a mage and you are a frost mage, let's say, you can spam frostbolt to your heart's content. If you ever get interrupted, you can instantly just full heal yourself with this, because the rogue's cooldown, right, the rogue's kick or the warrior's pummel will be on cooldown. And I think the shortest, I mean, shamans have like a 5-second earth shock, I think. But other than that, right, you're not really gonna have a interrupt lower than 6 seconds. Now, when they're followed up by a silence or whatever, right, that's a little bit more of an issue. But in general, if you get interrupted, you can just swap over to regeneration, instantly top yourself up, and then continue blasting. So I think in PvP, mages are gonna be a terror. But other than that, super cool. When it comes to arcane abilities, baseline, you only have arcane missiles and arcane explosion, and not really anything in your tree to augment that, right? The arcane tree is a interesting beast. It's a very utility focused tree, right? You have things like more mana, more armor, more mana. You have like 3% spell damage and crit. Then you have arcane explosion with 6% crit. Arcane explosion is not super powerful, but in AoE it can convert into a lot of healing, I would imagine. But other than that, like, a lot of these talents are not really through output increases or throughput increases. So, but arcane missiles by itself is pretty strong. At max rank, it deals 230 damage per second for 5 seconds, right? So that reaches over 1,000 damage. So in PvE, mages are definitely going to be incredible healers, especially with like mass regeneration, right? You give everybody your temporal beacon and then you just start arcane missiling. Or in AoE, you start arcane blasting. So very cool. To top this off, just to look forward a little bit, we also have rewind time. And this basically means that when someone has your temporal beacon and they take damage, you can press this button and it reverts all the damage taken in the last 5 seconds. Very powerful raid cooldown. I'm not sure if it's going to see a lot of play, I'm going to be honest. Like, I think in PvP, this is definitely a playmaking tool. But it kind of depends on the cooldown, right? If this is like a sub 1 minute cooldown, then yeah, it's probably pretty powerful. If this is like a proper cooldown of like 2 or 3 minutes or even 5, I'm not sure how popular this one is going to be. It seems kind of meh, because the healing is so strong that like you don't really need to revert damage. You just cast the heal and people are topped up, right? So I don't know about this one, but these ones are pretty good. Alright, Fingers of Frost. So this is something that Frost mages have these days, right? It's pretty simple. Whenever you apply a chill effect, you have a 15% chance to grant Fingers of Frost, which means your next 2 spells pretend the target was frozen. So this is basically the same as Frostbite, but just works on bosses, right? Because Frostbite is also a 15% chance to freeze the target, which means that your spells act as if the target is frozen. Now in PvP, combining Fingers of Frost with Frostbite is going to be pretty nasty, because that means you have 2 times 15% chance to get some frozen effects. So that sounds pretty nasty. But yeah, Fingers of Frost, very good for just like PvE DPS. Burnout. I think Burnout is pretty interesting, right? Increases the spell critical strike chance with all spells by 15. But when they crit, you lose 1% of your mana, or base mana. I think this is super cool, right? I think playing a little bit more with like mana consumption at the cost of, or like at the advantage of getting crits is very good, especially also for fire, because they have ignite. But Burnout actually works on all spells, right? Not just fire. So it also works with Frost, getting, you know, easier shatter combos. Or not shatter combos, what is it? It's... which one is the one that gives you the damage? Ice Shards, this one, yeah. Increases critical strike bonus up to 100, right? So I think you're still going to play Fingers of Frost almost every time, but there might be a case for Burnout. But Burnout is definitely very good for fire. I'm also looking forward to things like, you know, improved Flame Strike, giving you 15% crit on Flame Strike, and then getting another 6% from Critical Mass, and then getting another 15% from Burnout, right? So you're looking at like a Flame Strike with a baseline 36% crit. That sounds like a lot of damage, especially when it crits and everybody gets ignited. I don't know, it sounds like a lot of damage. Then we have Enlightened. This is, or Enlightenment. This is meant for Arcane. It looks pretty whack, I'm gonna be honest, right? It says you deal 10% more damage while you have more than 70% mana. And you, when below 30% mana, you gain 10% mana regeneration. Now, this sounds pretty weak, I'm gonna be honest. 10% more damage is kind of meh. And 10% mana regeneration also kind of meh, because when you're low, you're probably gonna evocate or use a mana gem. Right, and you already, like, mages already have quite a bit of mana regen baseline, right? 15% from Arcane Meditation and 30 from Mage Armor. So you have a baseline 45, so I don't think this 10% is going to matter. So Enlightenment, probably never going to be picked, I'm going to be honest. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't think this one is going to be picked. Then Legs, Living Flame. I've seen this one in action and it looks pretty funny. It's not actually like a targetable mob, right? You might think it's like a small fire elemental. It's actually not. It's just like a spell effect that, like a little fire spell effect that just chases people. And it's really funny in that sense. It also deals AoE damage. It's pretty good, actually. I think this is very good because it's untargetable. You cannot CC it. It just chases people. So this is free damage as long as people don't move. Very good. And in dungeons, of course, easy AoE, easy AoE damage. Mass regeneration, we already kind of talked about. It's the same as regeneration, but just AoE. Now, funnily enough, whatever I saw from the BlizzCon beta, mass regeneration had a lower mana cost than regeneration. I'm not sure if that's intentional. Maybe it is, right? Because it's less healing and less temporal beacon. But yeah, it would be pretty interesting because you might actually just not run regeneration and instead run mass regeneration. So that you can pick something else like Burnout or Fingers of Frost here, right? We will see. Then we have Arcane Surge. This is something that Arcane Mages have right now. It's an instant cast. It deals a bunch of arcane damage increased by up to 300% based on your leftover mana, and then it gives you a bunch of mana regeneration. Now, again, I've seen this on the BlizzCon beta. It didn't look very impressive, right? At full mana, it dealt something like 350 damage. And the mana regeneration was bugged, I think. Because, you know, I think I was watching Sony and his mana did not increase. Or Guzu, I think. Yeah, Guzu. So yeah, I don't know about this one. I think the damage is on the low end. They're trying to make that gameplay work that they have in live right now, where instead of Arcane Power, you have Arcane Surge, right? Because Arcane Power was also kind of like you go into this burn phase and then you go into this evocation phase. Combining Arcane Power with Arcane Surge, kind of funny. But yeah, I wonder how well it's going to play out. Then lastly, we have Icy Veins. Now, Icy Veins, of course, also a staple Frost Mage ability, but usable by everybody else as well. It's just 20% haste, very easy. I would imagine this to be a very popular talent, especially for Frost, but also for a lot of other builds. So on hands, we already talked about Rewind Time. Now we also get Icelands. Now, this is a fantastic addition. It really kind of, you know, Frost is just very much known for Icelands, right? It's been an incredibly successful ability in the history of Frost Mage. I also think it's going to be an incredibly powerful addition, especially now that mages can also regenerate. I am kind of fearing Frost Mages in PvP, because I feel like they're just going to cast like level 1 Frost Bolts until they proc Frostbite, and then immediately starts throwing Ice Lances at you, right? And that's why I said, like, you know, maybe you just want to only take Mass Regeneration, because then you take Fingers of Frost and Ice Lance. You know, so that you just start throwing like level 1 Frost Bolts, which cost like next to no mana. you fish for either Fingers of Frost or for Frostbite. As soon as they trigger, you start throwing massive Ice Lances at people because, you know, of course, you get the Shatter combo, you get the Ice Shards damage, they get triple damage, right? It sounds like it's all going to depend on how much damage Ice Lance actually deals. But on live, it's a pretty mean ability, right? So maybe it will be here too. But yeah, this looks like a very strong combo, and then you can either cap it out with like Mass Regeneration or Icy Veins. Then we have Arcane Blast. Now, Arcane Blast is an effort to, you know, synergize with these regeneration abilities and kind of flesh out the arcane repertoire. It's again one of those abilities that's pretty iconic. It functions mostly the same. The only difference is that you actually also get healing increase. So again, it kind of helps you with the regeneration. Yeah, I don't know how well this is going to play out, but for PvE, it's definitely a good addition. Although I feel like, you know, with Evocation, I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to handle your mana. I feel like these mages are going to build a lot of spirit to, you know, to keep up their mana pool. They do get 45%, you know, through Mage Armor and through the talent. I'm just quickly trying to find Evocation. Here it is. Yeah, so this is an 8-minute cooldown. So like generally, I'm not sure how well this is going to function in PvE. I think with Arcane Blast, because you do not have mana regeneration, you're kind of forced, I think, to take Arcane Surge if it's not bugged. Because you're going to yourself pretty fast, and then you have to Evocate. Or rather, you would do Arcane Blast, then probably do Arcane Surge to regen mana, then do Arcane Blast again, then Evocate, and then hopefully by that time Arcane Surge is back off cooldown so you can do it again. But after that, I don't know, man. It sounds like Mage kind of shit out of luck. So, yeah, I don't know. Could be very powerful. Could also just be kind of unusable because of the mana constraints. I guess we will see. And then Living Bomb, pretty easy spell. Also kind of like a fire staple ability. Just to add to that AoE. And again, I think with Burnout, Living Flame, and Living Bomb, all of these augment your AoE. So I think in like raids and dungeons, we're definitely going to see fire mages pop off with like massive AoE damage. So that's it for Mage. Overall, Mage definitely has some interesting augmentations, right? It is a bunch of stuff that they already have in the live game, but it's the stuff that really cements their gameplay, right? Where with the Druid, most of these things are just like, hey, you deal more damage or deal more healing. But with Mages, these things functionally change your options so much, right? Like Fingers of Frost enables the entire Frost tree to work on bosses. Ice Lance also just kind of gives you another option instead of Frostbolt. Arcane Surge, Arcane Blast, you know, completely rework your gameplay, and Burnout also changes the way you think about mana and the way you use mana, and also just give you some options. Living Flame, completely new ability. And of course the additions of healing. So overall, I think Mage is winning pretty well here. Very interesting and fun options to try out. I am kind of scared of how dominant Fire is going to be in PvE and how dominant Frost is going to be in PvP. This looks like pretty scary additions, but time will tell. Alright, the Paladin, my personal favorite. So, Paladin is getting a lot of functionality increases, right? Paladin is already a pretty competent class. It's just missing things like mana and a taunt. And all of these things get addressed and more. So to start out, we have Seal of Martyrdom. Now, this is already quite the ability. It basically makes sure it's a seal that makes your melee attacks AoE for 30% weapon damage. Up to 3 nearby targets, very good. You lose HP when you deal damage, but when you lose HP, other people gain mana. Very strong, especially also the mana return, right? Turning paladins even more into a melee, into a mana battery. Very powerful stuff. Then Unleashing the Seal will deal 70% weapon damage at the cost of 10% HP, or 10% of the damage as HP. Now 70% weapon damage is actually kind of strong, right? Because Seal of Command gives you 70% weapon damage, right? So you just trigger a Seal of Command proc. This is definitely going to swing the favor, or you know, it's going to swing the pendulum more in favor of like the strength two-hander builds, right? Because in Modern Classic, you know, we see some nudging towards like intellect builds with Seal of Righteousness and like very fast weapons, because it scales pretty well with spell power. Seal of Martyrdom might swing that hammer the other way, or you might just only kind of like use Seal of Martyrdom as a judgment instead of like an actual attack. Remains to be seen, but definitely a very interesting ability. Now, I also assume this is physical damage. So for tanking, this is not going to add a whole lot, apart from the fact of turning you into a mana battery, right? Because you're going to get healed anyway. And this might actually be pretty interesting as well, given like if you're on a raid boss or something and you do not take enough damage to benefit from the mana return from Hand of Reckoning. This might be an interesting way to damage yourself further to then get healed more, which means you're going to get more mana. Right? Interesting stuff to think about. Then we have Divine Storm. Now I'm going to assume this is the Wrath the Lich King one, which means it has a 10% cooldown, or sorry, a 10-second cooldown. It's just an instant weapon attack, 110% weapon damage to up to 4 targets, and 3 people get healed for a portion of the damage. Yeah, you know, staple retribution ability, very strong. I think it loses out to Seal of Martyrdom. Right, like Divine Storm hits 1 more target, but Seal of Martyrdom, right, especially combined with Crusader Strike, which is a 4-second cooldown instant strike. This triggers seals, I would imagine, because it's just a weapon strike. This means that, like, hey, if we assume that you have a weapon that's like 3.6 speed, which is like pretty common for two-handers, you're going to get at least 2 hits in, right? At least 2 auto attacks within 10 seconds, and at least 2 Crusader Strikes, which means you get 4 hits, 4 triggers of seal at the minimum, which means you're doing 120% weapon damage to up to 3 targets. So that is basically already kind of like equal to Divine Storm, except that you're missing 1 target, right? Because Divine Storm is 4 targets, Seal of Martyrdom is 3. But on top of that, in those 10 seconds, you can also get a Judge, so that's another 70% weapon damage on single targets. So basically that's that 4th target, right? And, you know, if you think about like the 10-second constraints, right? Like a Crusader Strike cooldown is 4 seconds, which means that in 12 seconds you're going to have your 3rd Crusader Strike. And thinking about like weapon speed, you know, 3.6, you might have a little bit of haste. So you're actually already pretty close to your 3rd auto attack. So I think Seal of Martyrdom might be winning out here. Even with this 4th target, I think you have enough damage from Crusader Strike and Seal of the Martyrdom together with like your weapon swings. So I don't know how it's going to stack up, but I think Seal of Martyrdom wins over Divine Storm. Not entirely sure though. At least Divine Storm allows you to, you know, have like Seal of Wisdom or Seal of Light or just Seal of Righteousness active. So maybe that's the difference here. I'm not entirely sure. Then we have Horn of Lordran. This is just kind of like Blessing of Might, but AoE. Gives you agility, gives you strength to everybody. Lasts 2 minutes, kind of short. So this is basically just kind of like a battle shout-ish thingy. This is one of those things where they said that they wanted to give some faction-specific stuff to neutral characters, right? Like I talked about with the Wild Strikes. So Horn of Lordran is kind of the replacement for the Strength of Earth totem, which also gives you strength and agility. So I think that's what they're going for here. Then we have Aegis. So Aegis is kind of the replacement for Redoubt. Redoubt is kind of known to be shitty because it only triggers after you being crit, and as a tank you do not want to be crit. So Aegis just gives you 30% block value, right? Because that's from this one, right? Shield spec. This gives you 30% shield value, but you have to take Redoubt to get it. So basically they just said like, hey, we're going to give you this 30% shield value, and then when you get attacked, you have a chance to increase your block by 30%, which is also what Redoubt does. So Aegis basically just combines Redoubt with shield specialization and makes it more viable. As a bonus, if you do take Redoubt, you get even more shield block value, right? So that's pretty cool. You can get up to 60%. Now, it will remain to be seen whether you want this as a protection paladin, because blocking is very cool. It triggers your Blessing of Sanctuary, it triggers your Holy Shield. But I can also imagine that maybe you might be interested in Horn of Lordran to increase the throw output throughput of everybody, or maybe get something like Divine Storm or Seal of Martyrdom. They are physical, so they won't generate as much threat, but it might be interesting, right? For example, with Seal of Martyrdom, with the self-damaging to get more heals, to get more mana. Because Hand of Reckoning is going to give you 25% of what you're healed as mana. So if you do not take enough damage, you might want to use Seal to damage yourself more, so there's more to heal. But otherwise, Aegis is an easy slot in. Then we have Divine Sacrifice. This is an ability I think that's currently in... Is it in Ref? I'm not entirely sure. But it basically just means like, hey, you take damage, you kind of absorb the damage from your party members around. Yeah, there's probably some PvE encounters where this is good. And in PvP it also sounds pretty strong. Then we have Inspiration Exemplar. Now this is basically just Tremor Totem, right? You turn the Paladin into a Tremor Totem. There's probably going to be like some encounters where this is really good. But yeah, it's not very exciting, right? Especially with some of the other options here. I think the Paladin that has to take this is going to be pretty sad. But hey, it's nice to have the option, I guess. Then we have Avenger Shield. Now, Avenger Shield, very strong, right? It allows a Paladin to do some upfront AoE damage. Very good for protection Paladins, because most of their threat is reactive damage, right? Through Blessing of Sanctuary, Holy Shield, and Retribution Aura. Their only real proactive way of dealing AoE holy damage is Consecration, and even that is kind of like, it's a slow burner. So it's nice that Paladins, protection Paladins, have a way to deal some large AoE holy damage. If this is the TBC version, it has a 30-second cooldown, so that might be, kind of sad. It does daze targets, right? So that's good for PvP, but a 30-second cooldown is kind of hefty. That means you're probably only going to be using it on the pool, because I think most trash packs are not going to last a minute, right? So, good addition, but also something that we are very familiar with. Then Exorcist. So this is actually very exciting. It adds the Exorcism ability to the Retribution repertoire, and also for other things, right? If you want to play something like a Shokadin. Exorcism is an incredibly powerful ability, and it's also one of the things that I can see getting out of hand. Let's grab the max version here, right? Like, this is a decent amount of damage, especially considering that you are going to get 160-ish spell power through Seal of the Crusader as well. So you're getting a decent amount of spell power for free. You can probably even get more, right? Maybe you could, because it's like a 15-second cooldown. So maybe you can make a macro that equips like a caster hammer, so that you can do even more spell damage before you cast Exorcism. Overall, very strong. This is definitely going to shake up the Paladin meta, because it gives them a lot more single target damage and also a lot more burst on the spot, right? I mean, I can only imagine, you're just running up to someone, you have like Seal of Righteousness active, or like you Judge Crusader, you have Seal of the Righteousness, you hit them with like your spell power hits, hit them with Crusader Strike, hit them with a fat Exorcism. Yeah, I can see this getting out of hand pretty quickly. I'm not sure how well Shokadin is going to be, especially because Holy Shock has a 30-second cooldown and scales not incredibly well with spell power. Also because it's just a lot weaker, right? I mean, it goes up to basically 400 holy damage, whereas Exorcism is in the 500s. But, combining this in PvP, right? Getting a Holy Shock Exorcism combo together with maybe like a Crusader Strike and a Judgment of Righteousness, you could probably stack up a decent amount of holy power on someone, burst someone down pretty quickly. So very excited to have this, actually, very excited. Definitely opens up Retribution gameplay. And I think also with Crusader Strike, right, you're going to see a lot more use out of Vengeance. 15% bonus damage, right, for both physical and holy. And it might make Sanctity Aura also a lot better, because, as a DPS Paladin, you don't really have any DPS seals, because Retribution is mostly for the tank. So it makes Sanctity Aura a lot better, because things like Seal of Command, Crusader Strike, and Divine Storm are all physical, so they don't benefit from Sanctity Aura. But now that you have access to Exorcism, and maybe, more Seal of Righteousness damage, Sanctity Aura might see a lot more play. I'm actually also curious if Avenger Shield can be casted without a shield. I would imagine you can't, but it might be interesting for Retribution Paladin to kind of make a macro to swap to Avenger Shield because it dazes the target, right? So having a ranged slow sounds pretty powerful as well. And then lastly, Rebuke. Having an interrupt is fun, but I don't think anybody's going to take this, right? If you have the choice between a ranged Holy Nuke or an interrupt, I don't know, right? I don't see it. I think Avenger Shield and Exorcism are so powerful that you will never see an opportunity to get Rebuke. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Now, lastly, we have quite the banger tier, Beacon of Light. The same one we are used to, but this one transfers 100% of the healing. This is pretty damn powerful, I gotta be honest. For healers, especially in PvE, but probably also in PvP, just being able to heal 2 targets at once at full value, given that like Holy Paladin is already such an efficient healer that never runs out of mana, right? You hit, yeah, really strong. I'm also wondering if, like for example, if you put Blessing of Light on the target, it counts as spell power. So I wonder if you have the main targets have Blessing of Light, if the conversion counts the Blessing of Light bonus as well. Because that would mean that you only need Blessing of Light on like one person, and then the other person can have a different blessing and still receive the healing as though there were a Blessing of Light. And even, it probably doesn't copy if you have both Blessing of Lights, right? Again, I don't think it double dips, but it's something to think about, right? Blessing of Light is very powerful, and copying 100% of that healing is very powerful. Also in PvP, right? I imagine this being a monster ability. Then we have Crusader Strike. Now, Crusader Strike, very cool. I'm not entirely sure if it is two-handed required. Let's quickly check. Requires a melee weapon, right? So you can use this as a tank, and I think people might actually. You can also use this as holy, right, to regen mana. Probably you're not going to, because Beacon of Light is just as powerful, but something to think about. Now, I can't really talk about Crusader Strike without also talking about Hand of Reckoning, because I think there's a lot of tension between these two for tanks. So with Hand of Reckoning, you just get the taunt. Your Righteous Fury goes up to 80%, right? It's not that it increases by 80%, it goes up to. Now, baseline, it's 60%. Goes up to 80%. Now, I wonder, I'm going to assume that that also is modified by Righteous Fury. So you go from 90% to... 90% to 120, yeah? Yeah, 120. So that's a decent increase in threat, but I don't think it's necessary, per se, right? I think because we're going to get more block, because we have Avenger Shields, and because we have more mana to work with, so we can be more aggressive with our consecrations, I'm not sure if the increase in threat matters. The most important part here is that you're going to get mana. You're going to get mana for 25% of the amount you're healed by other players. Again, kind of depends on how much that is going to increase your mana pool, right? Because I can definitely see a Prot Paladin using Crusader Strike instead. I think Crusader Strike might just be too little mana, but we will see. And then lastly, it also gives you the Righteous, or whatever, I forgot how they call this ability, but basically when you drop below 35%, you take 20% less damage. So you're probably going to lock this one in as a tank, but I can see, especially in PvP, I can see a case for maybe a tank with Crusader Strike instead. So overall, Paladin is looking very strong. Crusader Strike adds a lot of value, because, you know, you can also like, you can be like a monster soloer, because, you know, just imagine going up against a strong enemy, you judge Seal of Light, you judge Seal of Wisdom, you activate Seal of Light, and now you're just, you know, because basically this doubles your attack speed, right? Because you have a 3.6 weapon, this one has a 4-second cooldown, so you're going to get a lot more melee hits, which means a lot more procs of the self-healing and mana regeneration abilities. So I think you're probably going to see some Paladins soloing some absurd stuff. Because Paladins are already pretty good at, you know, soloing stuff, and I think Crusader Strike is only going to amplify that. So yeah, Crusader Strike carries this whole page, but there's a lot of other interesting stuff like Horn of Lordaeron, being a Tremor Totem, having Exorcist, being a full-fledged tank, right? A lot of stuff to look forward to. So Paladins, looking pretty good. All right, that brings us to Priest. So first up is Strength of Soul. This basically means that the weakened soul debuff on your target is going to be reduced by 4 seconds every time you use one of your major heals. Pretty effective, also pretty damn boring, gotta be honest. But yeah, it's just, you know, you get a lot of more value out of your Power Word Shield. So yeah, that's good. Serendipity. This basically means when you use Flash Heal, you reduce the cast time of your other single target heals and Prayer of Healing by 20%. So yeah, this is a pretty interesting like functionality difference. I'm not sure how efficient it is to spam Flash Heals, but there could probably be a world where you spam rank 1 Flash Heal to trigger Serendipity to get faster greater heals, for example. That might be very interesting, right? So I do appreciate Serendipity's addition, right? It changes up the gameplay in an interesting way. Then we have Void Plague. It doesn't really tell much, apart from the fact that it just looks like another dot. I don't know why, what the thought was behind this. Like just another instant cast dot, like why? We already have like, well, okay, we basically only have Shadow Word Pain, because you don't have Vampiric Touch, and if you're an undead, you have Devouring Plague, but it's like a big cooldown. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure if this is like the Devouring Plague, you know, kind of makes up for that. I would have liked to see something that actually returns mana, right? Because that's one of the things that Shadow Priest struggles with, is that they do not have mana regen. They fixed it with the Moonkin by giving them free Ravs. Void Plague doesn't do anything else but damage, and also has 0 synergy with anything in their toolkit, apart from the fact that it counts as shadow damage. So I don't know about this one. And then Twisted Fate. Mind Flay and Mind Blast deal 20% increased damage to target afflicted with Shadow Word Pain. This is very much a PvP talent, I would imagine, right? You get that big Mind Blast burst, especially combining it with like Inner Focus. Getting like a big Mind Blast crit increased by 20% sounds pretty good. Otherwise, you know, kind of whatever. 20% increase on like 2 of your main abilities is good, but also kind of meh, like uninteresting. Prayer of Mending. So again, one of those abilities that I'm just like, Blizzard seems to love this one, right? Because the retail class tree, or the retail spec talent tree, is completely, has like so many talents dedicated to Prayer of Mending. I don't see it. I have never liked Prayer of Mending. I think it's a silly ability. It's not very fun. Also has 0 synergies in the talent tree. So yeah, I don't know. Prayer of Mending just sounds really mediocre, but it is there. Homunculi. Now this is a new addition. They also showcased it at BlizzCon. And this one is generally pretty interesting. I don't know what the cooldown is. I expect something like 2 or 3 minutes, maybe shorter. Because this is basically kind of like Shadow Fiend, except that they also reduce attack speed, attack power, and armor. So the armor reduction is more of a supportive capability, right? Because the priest doesn't benefit from that at all. But the reduced attack speed and attack power sounds very strong in PvP, right? Being able to kind of like shut down a warrior or a rogue that's on you, diminishing their power, sounds pretty good. So yeah, fun ability. Shared Pain. Make sure Shadow Word Pain, you know, like small AoE. Very cool. Very nice functionality change. Helps a ton with mana efficiency, but only in AoE, right? This doesn't actually do anything for single target. But it does mean that you won't have to spam as many Shadow Word Pains in AoE, which is a very welcome change. And then we have Power Word Barrier. Now, a very powerful raid defensive. I wouldn't be surprised if this saw some play. Especially, it kind of depends on the cooldown. I hope it's not too big, but yeah, if your only other healer option is Prayer of Mending, I can see a lot of people taking Power Word Barrier because it's just way more interesting. And it's also 10 seconds, 25% damage reduction, so even in PvP this is going to be pretty good to counter burst. Now on the hands we have Shadow Word Death. Actually, I thought that Vanilla Priest had Shadow Word Death, but it turns out they don't. I'm not really like a big Shadow Priest person, so I didn't know. But yeah, again, I don't like, Shadow Word Death is like okay in the current game because it's supported by other things, but just chucking Shadow Word Death in there, because it doesn't even have the modifier that makes it deal bonus damage, right? That comes later, where Shadow Word Death becomes a proper execute. This is just like, hey, if your target is low health, you just can use this ability, kind of like Shadow Burn, I guess. Because it does seem, I'm not sure if that's Shadow Word Death rank 1, because it does seem to deal more damage than Shadow Burn. But yeah, it's not really like a proper execute, it's just kind of like a chuck it and forget it. Now it is nice that Shadow has some additional spells to cast, especially because like Mind Blast in PvE is still like a high threat ability, which is kind of sad. But yeah, I would much rather have seen something that helps them with the mana economy, because Shadow Word Death is also going to cost mana, I assume, and it also deals damage to you, which means that, you know, either you have to heal that yourself or somebody else has to. So again, none of these, right? This is just, hey, here is shadow damage, right? And this is not interesting functionality changes. I would have really liked to see something to the point where, you know, maybe with Shadow Word Death, when you take damage from it, it gives you mana equal to the damage you've taken or something. That would be interesting, right? Because then in essence it becomes a sort of life tap. Would have also been interesting to see maybe Void Plague be like, hey, whenever the target takes damage from Mind Flay, you regenerate mana as long as Void Plague is on the target or something. Stuff like that would have been really fun. But yeah, these are kind of boring options in my opinion. Circle of Healing. Again, this is a very well-known ability. Also just kind of whatever, right? Like Circle of Healing and Prayer of Mending are kind of boring in my opinion. It's not like Priest is lacking healing options, right? They have a more interesting repertoire than a lot of, well, no, I wouldn't say a lot of other healers, but compared to the other healers, Holy Priest was already pretty fleshed out, right? They have like Renew, they have Power Word Shield, they have, you know, like 4 different healing, single target healing buttons. They have Light Well, they have Holy Nova, right? They already have like some decent stuff, so I don't really see the need to add more of these buttons. I would have much rather, right? Like Serendipity is an interesting ability. I would have much rather seen something along the lines of Serendipity, or even Strength of Soul for that matter. So, you know, Serendipity, Powered Barrier, and then, you know, maybe Holy Priest just goes Penance. You know, maybe Penance is, you know, from a fun factor, I would go Penance. I would not go Circle of Healing. Now, from a throughput standpoint, you might want to go Circle of Healing. Who knows? But yeah, then Penance, very beloved ability. Penance just looks cool. Penance feels pretty great to play. So yeah, again, it is one of those abilities that we are very familiar with, which is slightly sad. But it's also Penance, and Penance is actually kind of cool, right? It looks badass. The damage seems a little bit on the low side, but I do wonder if... because something like a Smite Priest build is not really supported, and Penance doesn't really support it either. That is actually one thing that I'm also kind of lacking here. It would have been great to see maybe... because like Smite Priest was like on the cusp of being something, right? If you are playing with a Paladin that has like improved Seal of the Crusader, you get like 160-ish... 160-ish Holy Spell Power. And then you take all the talents here, right? You get the one that gives you, you know, spell power equal to your spirit. You get this one, 10% damage. You get this one, reduce the cast time. And then, you know, maybe you can reach up to... I don't think you can reach up to here, no. But alternative to Spiritual Guidance, you can take Force of Will, which gives you spell damage and crit strike. Like, Smite Priest was pretty close to being something. And I'm really surprised that they did not take the opportunity, right? Why did they go Prayer of Mending? Why didn't they just say like, hey, reduce the mana cost of Smite by like, I don't know, 50%, deals like bonus damage to targets affected by Holy Fire, and it heals like everybody for 10% of the damage it deals, right? Something like that would have been super cool, right? Because Druid's got this Fury of Stormrage talent, which basically makes Wrath like contribute to healing by giving you healing touches, and also improving the mana efficiency. And Priest could have really benefited from something to kind of unlock that Smite Priest style that everybody wants, right? Because we've actually never had a Holy Caster, believe it or not. Surprisingly, actually, we have no Holy Caster, never in the game. Which, to me, just sounds like a very big missed opportunity, right? Because in retail right now, they are pushing it somewhat. Not as in like a DPS build, but more as in like they give Holy Priest some more stuff to play with, right? If we quickly take a look at retail, God forbid. Close your eyes, classic players, close your eyes. You know, you have like Holy Word Chastise, you have Imperial Blaze, which gives you Holy Fire. Like, why did they not just add Imperial Blaze, right? This is a pretty good ability, right? And then you have like Burning Vengeance, right? Deals increased Holy Fire damage, and Holy Fire does AoE, super cool. And then they have things like Chakram or Divine Word. I'm actually talking about Chakram. I'm surprised they didn't add Chakram in here. But yeah, like Divine Word increases the effectiveness of your next Holy Word. So in this case, Chastise. And it says like, oh, increase your damage by 30%, and Smite has a 40% chance to apply Holy Fire. Like, why is that not in this tree? Right? Just say like, hey, Smite has like a reduced mana cost and has a 40% chance to apply Holy Fire, right? And then have this one as well. Be like, well, Holy Fire now stacks with itself, right? Like, why is that stuff not in here? That would be so cool. But sadly, they seem to go with these super boring options. So I'm really hoping that Priest, right, once we get some more armor slots, right? Because I'm assuming we got like a helmet and maybe a shoulder slot. Because they've already said they're going to add more. Just depends which ones. But I really hope that they're going to add some things to maybe support Smite Priest. Would be very fun and actually an untapped fantasy to have a fully fledged Holy Caster. Like an offensive Holy Caster. But you know, that's daydreaming. Sadly, we get Prayer of Mending, Circle of Healing, and Penance. So Smite Priest, shit out of luck, I guess. And then we have Mindseer. Now, Mindseer in retail, very much hated, but in Classic, this makes a lot more sense, right? Because Classic by its very nature is a lot more slower, and Mindseer fits much better in this older style. So I'm happy to see it. I think for dungeons, it gives Shadow Priest some very, very good potential, right? Because you get all the benefits of running with a Shadow Priest, right? Which is like the buffs, and the off heals and stuff like that, and the dispels. But you also get like Shadow Word Pain AoE, Mindseer AoE, very fun stuff. Again, I would have liked to see anything to help with Priest mana, because that's, I think, one of their big downsides. And Druid got it, and Shaman got it to an extent, but Priest just completely ignored, so they have to rely on Spirit Tap to get their mana back. So overall, Priest, you know, it's a pretty decent tree. It is my least favorite tree just from a creativity standpoint, right? I think Serendipity opens up some fun new gameplay. These ones are just number increases. Homunculi is a cool new spell. I like it. Shared Pain is a good functionality increase. Barrier, you know, not very exciting, but it is very powerful. Prayer of Mending, Circle of Healing, Penance, to me, kind of meh. And then Shadow Word Death, also kind of like, yeah, Shadow Word Death is not very impressive if it doesn't have synergies. And it doesn't, right? Because this tree is not used to Shadow Word Death, so it doesn't really have any good synergies here. And then Mindseer, you know, it's an acceptable bonus. I would have liked to see some more being done here. Alright, Rogue. Now, Rogues definitely have some interesting stuff. Also, they have like a lot of options, right? They have a lot of skills to augment. So Deadly Brew, probably the most boring one here, but it's very effective, and it basically means whenever you use any other poison, you will also inflict deadly poison. So, you know, this is what it is. It's very good for PvP. It's also going to combine pretty well with Envenom, I would imagine, just to skip ahead a little bit, because Envenom actually gives you an increased frequency of applying instant poison. Not general poisons, right? It's only instant poison. So basically, if you want to do like a assassination poison build, you would have to use Deadly Brew, because that means you can do double instant poison. And that means that, like, hey, more instant poisons means more deadly poisons. Otherwise, you know, pretty decent one, just nice little damage increase. Then we have Slaughter from the Shadows, reduces the energy cost of Backstab and Ambush by 20. Now this is pretty interesting. Backstab is already kind of like a staple DPS ability, and reducing that by 20 energy sounds pretty powerful in my opinion. It's going to make the Rogue opener, right, with Ambush also a lot more brutal, just giving them more energy to play with. Doesn't apply to Mutilate, probably for a good reason, because Mutilate already sounds pretty strong. We're going to get to that soon. Quick Draw, this is basically like the pistol shot that we have in like Outlaw Rogue right now. And it benefits from everything that Sinister Strike benefits from. Now, we're going to have like 1, 2, 3, 4 abilities that benefit from Sinister Strike modifications. Which are not a lot, right? That's like 5 energy cost and like 6% damage, because I think that's the only things that Sinister Strike actually affects. I guess maybe this one. Yeah, okay, so I guess you have critical strike damage, and I think that's it, yeah. So we have, like, what is this, 30% critical damage, I think. Let me just quickly... Yeah, 30% crit damage, 6% overall damage, and 5 energy reduction. But yeah, I think I saw on the beta that this is a 10-second cooldown, I think. So it's not completely broken, but yeah, ranged slow for rogues, definitely very powerful. It's going to be very hard to deal with that, I think. And other than that, you know, if it crits, right, it's going to deal pretty decent damage if you have all these augments here. But yeah, nice little addition for rogues. Then we have just a flesh wound. Oh boy, this is going to take a minute. So this is rogue tanking. You take 20% reduced physical damage while Blade Dance is active. That is this one. It's not to be confused with Blade Flurry, right? I think some people might confuse it with Blade Flurry. But it's Blade Dance, so you have to take this one if you want to benefit from just a flesh wound. Additionally, you have 6% reduced chance to be crit. This is basically standard for tanks. And threat generation is massively increased. I wonder how massively. And your taunt, you get a taunt in the name of tease, right? Your feint becomes a taunt. I have some issues with this. I'm going to be honest. I think design-wise, it's super cool, right? Rogue tanking, I would have liked it if they, because like back in the beta, rogues had like bucklers. That's like a pretty well-known thing. Bucklers, it would have been cool if they added that here. I'm going to be honest, like just a flesh wound, it would have been great if they had bucklers here. Not having bucklers is not the end of the world. There's a lot of other options here. I just have big concerns with how this is going to work. I don't think rogues can be fully fledged tanks, right? Like they do have talents like lightning reflexes, like deflection, like riposte. And all of these are going to see a lot more use if you are a rogue tank. And it's going to be pretty fun, I imagine. On top of that, we have stuff like endurance, right? Getting more evasion cooldown. And other than that, I think you have, yeah, reduced crit chance, but that's not really interesting. Reduced chance to be hit. Most of this other stuff doesn't really impact tanking. It just DPS increases. So we have like 5% dodge, 5% parry. We have riposte. We have some cooldown for your evasion. And some like ranged hit reduction. Rogues by default, I think, hover around 20% dodge, depending on how much agility you have on your gear. But when I was leveling my rogue, I was pretty consistently like above or slightly under 20%. I'm not sure if 20% reduced physical damage is going to make them tanky enough. If you compare that to like a paladin who wears plate, who wears a shield, who can block and has increased like 30% increased block value, and maybe up to 60 when they use shield spec, and even more block chance with Holy Shield, and takes reduced damage from Blessing of Sanctuary, right? And can maybe, if they want, use Devil Aura, right? You put that up against a warrior who wears plate, who has block, who has toughness in their talent tree, who has guaranteed blocks, who has maximum HP increases, who has shield wall, right? You put that up against a druid who wears leather but gets like 360% armor, and bonus HP, and gets thick height, and gets like 20% stamina, right? These are all big boosts, right? These are all big boosts to survivability, and I'm not sure if 20% physical damage reduction is enough to compete with that on like a serious level. On top of that, you are adding this additional complexity that the 20% damage reduction is only active when Blade Dance is active. Now, Blade Dance is a finisher, which means that you need to get in there and get hit because you need to build a combo point, at least one. So you're gonna get in there, or maybe like you stealth in there, right? That could be a thing that you say like, hey, to your party members, like, hey, wait, you know, because that has a good track record of working. But saying to your party members like, hey, hold up, I need to do an ambush, then I need to do a Blade Dance. So let's say you have like, nah, you're probably not going to take setup. It's way too deep in the subtree. But like, so you're going to get, 2 combo points, and then you have 18 seconds of Blade Dance and 7% parry. So at that point, you know, you're good. You have 20% physical reduction, you have 7% parry. But what happens next, right? You use Ambush. Ambush costs like, what, 60 energy or something? Just gonna fill out this talent tree for a sec just to get some... Alright, let's see. Ambush. Yeah, 60 energy. So Ambush and Cheap Shot is also 60 energy, right? So these are both the same. So you open with one of these. That's 60 energy down. 2 combo points. You immediately spend on Blade Dance. Now Blade Dance also going to cost probably somewhere of like 25 energy, right? Because that's what most finishers are. If you look at Slice and Dice, 25. I think Expose Armor is also 25. Yep. So this is probably going to be 25. So now you're down 85 energy. And the pool has just begun. That means you cannot cast anything. If there's more than one mob, right? If there's like 2 or 3 mobs in that pack, how are you going to get any threat on any of them? Right? Because the Rogue does not have AoE. And they're not going to get AoE either. Maybe in like a future rune slots, right? But for right now, there's no option to get AoE. On top of that, right, AoE tanking works adversely with combo points, because the point of combo points is that you kind of stick on the same target, build up combo points, and then do a big finisher. But if you tap target and you do like a Sinister Strike or one of these, you know, new abilities, if you do any of those, you're going to build a combo point. But then if you tap target to a new one, you're going to lose that combo point, right? So getting like a 5-point Blade Dance, how? Right? You can only do this on single target. Now on single target, your job becomes a lot easier. But just by the nature of how single target focused the entire Rogue concept is in Classic, because energy is just slow, right? It's not like Retail where you can build combo points in the blink of an eye. In Retail, it's slow. Or sorry, in Classic, it's just slow, right? It takes a long time. Your builders are like 40 energy. You only have 100 energy, and the tick rate of the server is pretty slow. So getting to 5 combo points is a chore. So yeah, I don't see this work in dungeons at all. Like in raids, maybe. But even then, right, you have 20% reduced physical damage. If there's any magic, right, you're going to get absolutely clapped because you do not have the stamina. And you do not have any stamina increases. Right, because that's what like a lot of these other tanks, you know, at least they have, well, I think, you know, characters like warriors, they don't really have stamina increases either. And Paladin also kind of not. Druid has it though. And even Shaman has it. But Druid has it, and they also get damage reduction just flat out. So, I don't know. I think rogue tanking is going to be pretty niche. It is going to be very good for open world though, I will say that. Getting 20% reduced physical damage is pretty good in open world. That's a lot about rogue tanking. I do not believe in it. I am not a believer. But maybe in the future when they expand this, would be great if something like Riposte was AoE or something. Because that, you know, 6-second cooldown AoE attack that triggers when you parry. You know, that sounds pretty fair. Between the Eyes, kind of the same as in Retail. Having a ranged kidney shot basically. It shares a cooldown with kidney shots. But yeah, with Quick Draw and Between the Eyes, rogues are become quite a threat at range. Especially if you're like a mage, you blink away, right? You know, a rogue opens up on you, does like Cheap Shot. You know, you blink it, he immediately does a Quick Draw followed by Between the Eyes. You know, that sounds like some pretty good shit. So I think rogue skill cap definitely increases a bit. They have a lot more options. Then we have Blade Dance. We already talked about this one. Basically, this should have been incorporated in here, in my opinion. And then Blade Dance itself should have been an ability to give you AoE. I think that would work way better. And Venom, already kind of talked about this one as well. This is just like Eviscerate, but for, you know, if you want to go to poison build. I wouldn't say boring, right? Because it does kind of open up Assassination, which might be very fun for people, and it works very well with Deadly Brew. Then on the last tier, we have some interesting builder options, right? Because 4 of these are just builders. Mutilate, you know, Mutilate is a pretty common ability in TBC and beyond. So again, this just helps open up the Assassination playstyle. So very happy to see this. It also benefits from everything that Backstab benefits from. And that's pretty important because Backstab has 30% increased crit, has increased crit damage, Right, so if you want, right, you can get like 5% crit here, 5% crit here, 30% crit here. So you have 40% crit on Mutilate default. And then you have something like Sealed Fate, right, where you get another crit, another combo point if your ability crits. So I think Mutilate Assassination Rogue is going to be a very competitive build. From the looks of it, right, there's a lot of things in favor, especially now with Envenom. So that's going to be very interesting to see. Then we have Shadow Strike. Shadow Strike basically just, because this has to be cast from stealth, so this is basically just ambush, but with a teleport attached to it. It does deal significantly less damage than ambush. Let me check ambush. Yeah, so like rank 1 ambush, because this is like higher rank, but yeah, so it just deals less damage than ambush, but you don't need a dagger. So again, yeah, this is pretty good stuff. It's going to allow rogues to do stuff like Vanish, Shadow Strike. In combination with Between the Eyes and Quick Draw, right, this is going to become some really strong ranged play from the rogue. Then we have these ones. Saber Slash. It works kind of like Lacerate. It's just like a Sinister Strike replacement that adds a bleed. Pretty simple stuff. Then we have Shift. This just applies your poison. I'm not sure if this has a cooldown. I would imagine it does. I'm not sure if it's like meant to replace Sinister Strike. If it does, pretty interesting for Assassination again, but I think you're always going to take Mutilate in that case. But I think this is the one with the cooldown. And then we have Main Gauche. I think it's called Gauche. And this is kind of like the tank Sinister Strike because it gives you 10% parry. Again, I really feel like they should have given this AoE. Right? If this had AoE, like if it was an AoE builder, then you could use it with Blade Dance and just a Flesh Wound to get an actual rogue tank. But this is a single target ability that gives you 10% parry, and that's all it does. It just replaces your Sinister Strike, and it's also worse, right? Because it instantly strikes with your offhand weapon, and your offhand weapon is always weaker. So I don't know about this one, man. This, unless it costs next to nothing, right? If this is like a 10 energy, then it would be more useful. But yeah, as it stands, again, just like a Sinister Strike replacement that gives you 10% parry, not very interesting. So for rogues, in terms of PvP, a lot of cool additions here. Very happy to see it. In terms of PvP, right, Quick Draw, Between the Eyes, Shadow Strike, right, I think rogues are going to be a nightmare to deal with for most classes. But that's also the rogue model, right? You're just going to get slaughtered from range. And then as far as the tank rogue goes, I have no faith so far. I hope they add some additional things to flesh it out, because I do think the idea is fun, just that the execution doesn't quite match the idea so far. Alright, that brings us to Shaman. So Shaman got a lot of interesting toys, in my opinion. To start with, Dual Wield, and giving you increased chance to hit, and now allowing you to hit Storm Strike with both weapons. We will see with Dual Wield and also Lava Lash that they're really going hard on the Dual Wield Shaman. I am kind of sad that like two-handed weapons is not being supported here. It's kind of sad to see, right? Because like, I don't know, like we already have Enhancement Shaman in retail. This would have been a prime opportunity to really flesh out that, you know, two-handed Shaman fantasy that people seem to like. And I definitely agree. It would have been great. Like, it's okay to give them the option for Dual Wield, but I feel like, you know, since TBC and beyond, they've supported that, so maybe now was the chance to go back for two-handed stuff. Sadly, no alternative here, but hey, for those who like Dual Wield Shaman, here you go. Then we have Shield Mastery. Now, this is in conjunction with Way of Earth and Molten Blast, is kind of your tank package. So just how rogues get their tanking things. So too do Shamans, and I think they executed a little bit more competently. They were already also like more on their way than rogues were. So Shield Mastery, each time you block you gain mana, so this is very important, right? Same for the Paladin, is that the mana is always a big constraint. It also gives you bonus armor equal to your shield's armor value, so that's just like, you know, to kind of compensate for the fact that you're a mail user instead of a plate user. And And you always gain 10% increased block chance and 15% block value. So this is just like super value in one talent, right? You get a lot of defenses. And this is something that I was complaining about with just the Flesh Wound, right? Is that this seems way more holistically, right? You get more armor, more block chance, more block value. These are passive things, always online. You get to wear a shield, you have mail armor, right? It makes a lot more sense for shamans to be tanks than for rogues. They already are well on their way. And then the mana is just kind of like a funny thing. And on top of that, right, you also have shield spec, right? So they already get 5%. So they have 15% block chance and they get 25% increased block value, which is now increased by another 15, right? So this already sounds way more promising than Rogue does. Overload, this is the mastery that elemental shamans have on retail. Basically, when you hit with a bunch of spells, you have a 33% chance to cast a second similar spell with no additional cost that causes half damage or healing. Now, the interesting part here is, of course, the healing on Chain Heal and Healing Wave specifically, not on Lesser Healing Wave. I guess it's like good for healers, but healers don't really like RNG. So I'm not sure if we're going to see a lot of Resto Shamans pull this one out. But for Elemental, this is, you know, it's a welcome DPS increase. And then we have Healing Rain. Kind of the same Healing Rain we have today. And yeah, nothing much to say about it. It's just like, it's a nice thing to have, I think. I'm not entirely sure about Shaman Healing, because I generally, you know, back in the day I played Alliance. So I don't really have a feel for Shaman Healing. But you know, it sounds nice in raids to just add a little bit of blanket healing. Ancestral Guidance, same thing we kind of have in retail. They do have like the added value of like specifically targeting flame shock targets. I'm not sure if that's also in retail, but that is really good because it means that, for example, in PvP, you can very like kind of focus snipe someone instead of hitting random targets. But yeah, 25% of your damage is converted to healing. That's a nice supportive bonus. I think it's going to be beaten out by the other options here, but it's a nice support bonus if you want to play more of a supportive shaman. And for healers, it's a good way to kind of get some extra damage in, especially in PvP. I think this is a nice addition. Because like in PvE, I don't think it matters. Earthen Shield. This is kind of like the old Earthen Shield, because new Earth Shield on retail has like a bunch of different bells and whistles. But this one is basically just like, yeah, reduce casting and channeling time lost, which is kind of like whatever, I feel like. And then causes your target to heal whenever they are attacked. So pretty basic stuff. I have never been like the hugest fan of Earth Shields. Like I've started to like it in recent time because of all the bells and whistles. Like you do bonus healing on the target and the target takes like 6% less damage passively. And there was also a time where like casting heals on the target would give you Earth Shield charges. Sorry. Yeah, and this one is like, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. If you're like a single target Resto Shaman, right? If you're like tank healing or whatever, you know, why not? You know, why not? I'm going to skip over Way of the Earth for a sec. I want to talk about Shamanistic Rage real quick. Shamanistic Rage is currently, or like, not currently, it used to be, right? In like TBC and Wrath of the Lich King. It's like a enhancement shaman talent. And it looks pretty powerful, I'm gonna be honest, right? You just press the button and you take 20% reduced damage. I think Shamanistic Rage is like a 1 minute cooldown, if memory serves, but I'm not sure what they made this version. This one could be longer. But for 15 seconds, right? So 15 seconds damage reduction, pretty damn strong, gotta be honest, especially also for, you can't really combine it with tanking, but like if you could combine this with tanking, that would be pretty strong. But it also regenerates mana per second equal to 15% of attack power, 10% of spell power, or 6% of healing power. I am not entirely sure what this will convert to, so it's hard to say if this is valuable, because I don't really know what like your average elemental shaman, how much spell power they're supposed to have. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not, I don't really have those numbers, but I think you can definitely get some value out of this together with Mana Spring Totem. Not sure how useful this will be. Maybe it's like you'd only take it for the damage reduction and the mana is kind of mediocre. But in concept, I really like this because it gives elemental shamans a way to regen mana, right? Because we kind of have that trio going on of Balanced Druid, Shadow Priest, and Elemental Shaman who are all handicapped by their mana. So I do like ways that, you know, an elemental shaman can get their mana back. I always support that. And of course for resto, it's especially in PvP, right? Very powerful button in PvP for all shaman specs. So good addition. All right, so Way of the Earth. So this is your enabling tanking button. So while Rockbiter is active on your main hand, you deal 100% increased threat. Now notice that it's not Rockbiter that deals increased threat, it's the Shaman, which is pretty important. Because it means that everything generates more threat. You gain 30% increased health and take 10% reduced damage, right? So this is again something that the Rogue is missing. You gain increased health, take reduced damage, and then on top of everything that Shield Mastery gives you and everything that Shield Specialization gives you, right? I imagine that Shamans are pretty competent tanks as long when it comes to damage reduction. Yeah, the 6% reduced chance to be crit, that's pretty standard. And Earth Shock now is a taunt, and has a separate cooldown from other shocks. That's actually pretty cool, right? It's now melee range, which is kind of like, you know, it is your primary interrupt. So that is a trade-off. But having it on a separate shock is really cool. And again, is one of those things that Rogue is missing. Because now what you can do is you can start off with an Earth Shock on one target and immediately Flame Shock a second target. And that Flame Shock is also going to benefit from your 100% increased threat, right? So you can now also spread Flame Shocks to generate passive threat. So very good. I like this version a lot, right? I think together with Shield Mastery, I hope this mana return is enough, but I think it is. 4% mana per block. That sounds pretty good. So I'm really I'm really hype about these two. I think this is a great get out of here. This is a great combo. And then the last tier we have Water Shield. Water Shield gives you 1% of your mana per 5 seconds. Doesn't sound like a lot, but of course the real value is when you get hit. And this is again great for Elemental, right? Elemental might also go for Lava Burst, just because it's such a strong skill. So I would imagine that most of LE Shamans are going to go for Lava Burst. But if you really find yourself hungering for mana, then Water Shield might also be an option. Otherwise, this is like a resto only thing, right? But I gotta be honest. If you have enough mana with Shamanistic Rage, why not just pick a Lava Burst, even as resto, right? I mean, helping to blow up a priority target sounds pretty good. But yeah, nice to have. You know, maybe it could have been like a little bit different because it has such stark competition on this row, right? I'm not sure if it's powerful enough to really compete with the options here. But if you're just like a pure-blooded resto shaman, this is your only option. So, you know, you take those. Lava Burst, already alluded to. This looks pretty damn good, especially because, let's see, critical. Yeah, so it does benefit from this Elemental Fury, especially because it's like a guaranteed crit. Very nice. You can combine it pretty easily with Elemental Mastery, right? Elemental Mastery gives you 100% crit. So I imagine in Elemental PvP, we're going to see a lot of Flame Shock followed by Lava Burst followed by Elemental Mastery Chain Lightning. Right, that sounds pretty juicy. People are going to get blown up. You're definitely going to see some montages. Looking forward to those. I imagine Elemental Shamans are pretty happy with this one. Lava Lash, also pretty predictable, right? As soon as they went with the dual wield spec, you know, Lava Lash wasn't far behind. Blizzard loves Lava Lash. As you can tell by retail talent design, half the fucking tree is based on it. But yeah, Lava Lash staple. And it works the same way as you would expect. It's just do damage button. I think, does the old version have like 18-second cooldown or 20? I don't. It's probably a pretty decent cooldown, right? Together with Storm Strike. Maybe it's less, but yeah. I mean, I am not too hype about the fact that it doesn't really do anything except damage, right? I would have liked, because Lava Lash nowadays has like a in retail, Lava Lash again has like a lot of bells and whistles, and I feel like maybe it could have benefited from spreading flame shock, or having some kind of interaction with like the Searing Totem. I think this one is a little bit dry, right? Because this is just because it's actually weapon damage, right? It's not even fire damage. I think I'm not entirely sure. Nah, it's probably fire damage, but it doesn't reflect that. And this one is also just like an extra attack, right? So it's very physically based. Not entirely sure about this one. But yeah, I mean, if you're enhancement, this is your only option again. And then we have Molten Blast. Now, this is again something that I was talking about with rogues, is that you need to have AoE, because the best tanks, that being like Warrior, Druid, Paladin, right, they have AoE. Now, Warrior, you know, debatable how much AoE they have, right? They have like Demo Shout and Tap Target Cinder Armors. But to be fair, they also got some AoE in this Season of Discovery. But yeah, for these non-meta tanks, I think AoE is really mandatory. Now, Shaman is by default not as constricted by energy as a rogue is, so they just have more freedom of action. Right, they can burn a lot of mana to generate a lot of threat if they want to. Rogue doesn't really have that option. But it's nice that they still thought about it, right? So they just have like, hey, you have a cone of fire damage, it generates a high amount of threat, right? So this already has its own threat modifier, which only gets modified by this. So that's really nice. And your Flame Shock periodic damage has a 10% chance to reset the cooldown. I'm gonna be honest, that's super cool, right? That's the kind of stuff, like that more advanced interaction that I would have liked to see in Lava Lash. Because Lava Burst is like, well, it will always crit. Molten Blast has a chance to reset, right? Because that's a future talent for Lava Burst, basically, right? Where like you have Lava Surge. Right, so they have advanced interactions, and Lava Lash is kind of just like whatever. So, you know. Overall, Shaman tanking, right? Everybody loves Shaman tanking. It's been very anticipated. I'm happy for the people. Sadly, I have to play Alliance because of my guild, so I don't get to play with this. Maybe on my alt, but yeah, I think they executed it in probably the best way they could have done it, right? You have mana return and defenses, more defenses and threat, and you have the AoE, right? This is just what you want to see. This is perfect. Other than that, there's some fun new options here. Well, actually, like, all of them are, except for Way of the Earth and Shield Mastery and Molten Blast, right? Other than the tanking stuff, all of this is basically kind of like borrowed from the future. But I think in the way that Shamanistic Rage functions a little bit differently, in the fact that we get dual wield specialization early with these older talents and stuff. I don't know, I like it. I think Shaman is already fun enough by itself. It has a lot of useful toys, fun toys to play with, but it just kind of lacks the mana to really go all out. And with Shamanistic Rage, Water Shield, Shield Mastery, right, I feel like that gives them some tools to really go make more advantage of their already pretty fun kit. So overall, pretty happy about this one. Then continuing on with the second to last, Warlock. Starting off with Lake of Fire. What this does is that when you cast Rain of Fire, you leave a Lake of Fire on the ground, which is a pretty funny wordplay. It just deals bonus fire damage, and it increases all fire damage you deal, and your pet deals bonus damage. To be fair, sounds pretty damn strong. I like this. It sounds strong. You can do, like, if you want to play dangerously, I can definitely see some Warlocks going Rain of Fire to get this applied, and then going in for the Hellfire. Pets don't really benefit too much from this, because there is no pet that has innate AoE, if memory serves. I think the only thing is like no, there's actually no AoE at all. So yeah, this is mostly a single target buff for your demon pet. But for your Warlock ability, you know, it's nice. It's just extra damage in a new creative way that we haven't seen before. I support it. Master Channeler. Now this ability, oof, man, oof. I don't know about this one, boys. Your drain life is no longer channeled. Instead, it's a 15-second dot with a 15-second cooldown. It costs 100% more mana, and it heals you for 50% more each time it deals damage. This sounds pretty busted, I'm gonna be honest, right? Because if you go Affliction, right, you get here 10% increased draining, then you have another 10% increased draining, right? You have the range increase, stuff like that. Like, I feel like this is pretty powerful, because drain life spamming is already like a pretty okay way to kind of like, you know, war of attrition your opponent to death. Combining Master Channeler with Siphon Life and, you know, spoilers ahead, Warlock tanking, right? Combining basically a jacked up Siphon Life together with the normal Siphon Life together with being a tank. I don't know, man. This sounds disgusting. It sounds absolutely disgusting. But hey, maybe I'm exaggerating too much. Maybe it's actually okay, but it just sounds disgusting. Also because this is now not interruptible, right? Because like the disadvantage of Drain Life is that's a channel. So when you start, you know, sucking your opponent dry, you can always get interrupted and it takes a long time. But with this one, you're just like, well, I applied it and there's nothing you can do to it. I also wonder if this is dispellable, right? Because it's probably not a curse. It might be a curse, but it's probably not. It's probably a magic effect. And I think Priest is the only one that can dispel magic. I think. So I don't know. Sounds pretty disgusting. Soul Siphon increases the amount drained by your Drain Life and Drain Souls spell by 6% for each of your Warlock Shadow effects. Now this is just like the DPS version of Master Channeling. This is not really like, it has some PvP application because it does increase the drain, but overall this is like a it sounds more like a DPS increase kind of deal than more like, I feel like this is with the sunken cost of the channel time that you need for either Drain Life or Drain Soul. This just sounds like a better use of your time, especially because it does deal more damage. So I'm not entirely sure what the point of this one is, because it goes up to 18%, which is 3 dots. I don't know. Maybe Drain Soul slaps, but I feel like you wouldn't spend your time Drain Souling if you didn't have to. So not entirely sure about this one. The only thing I can imagine is that because this is spread over 15 seconds, it might be that this allows you to heal a little bit more at the start, right? It allows you to burst heal a little bit more. That could be the use case in PvP, that you say like, okay, I don't need Master Channeler because it's just too slow. Because like the tick rate is probably like once every 3 seconds or something, right? As most dots are. So maybe Soul Siphon is like, hey, I want more burst option. Maybe that's it. Demon Tactics, I don't know. This is probably for like meant to be for tanks. Increases the melee and spell critical strike chance of you and your pet by 10%. Like, yeah, I guess if none of these sound appealing to you, just 10% free crit, why not? But I'm not sure. Like this, I guess this is maybe more interesting for people who want to go hard into demonology. But in vanilla, demonology isn't really about your demons. It's more about just random augments. Or like, yeah, maybe this is like better for early leveling. But yeah, I don't see this being really strong. I think if you go to tank build, you probably go Master Channeler. And I think Lake of Fire is like way stronger, like 40% damage for your pet for 15 seconds. Even in single target as a Warlock, you're probably dropping like, you're probably like doing 1 tick of Rain of Fire and then cancelling it just to get this buff. If you want pet DPS, right? Because this ain't it. 10% crit is kind of meh in my opinion. Everlasting Affliction. This just means their corruption becomes basically permanent. I don't know. I think this is way too weak. Because like it's, you save 1 global cooldown every, what's it, like every 12 seconds. I mean, it's okay. I don't know, it doesn't sound great because it refreshes duration of corruption. Yeah, nothing else. So I don't know, this sounds kind of weak. Because like in retail, Warlocks have like a lot going on. But in vanilla, as an Affliction Warlock, you don't really have that much going on, right? You have like 2 dots, maybe 3 if you have Master Channeler, right? Maybe 4 if you have Silent Life. But this one is 30 seconds, this one is 15 seconds. Agony is like 24. Yeah, it's 24. And other than that, you're shadow balling, right? It's not like you're really doing anything with your time. So to add something like this to make corruption permanent sounds like a waste of potential, in my opinion, especially given some of these other choices. So Incinerate, burn your target and increase all fire damage you deal. Again, they increase fire damage by 25. And this one is increased fire damage by 40%. This sounds way strong, I'm gonna be honest, especially on PvE single target. Like, going Destruction, especially because like this one is Chaos Bolt, right? And it's also fire damage. These 3 together sound like a world of hurt, especially on single target. I think Warlocks might be blasting. Because you're just going to clip your Rain of Fires. It's very mana inefficient, but like you can apply a buff for like 15 seconds. Increase all fire damage you deal. And this one increases all fire damage you deal. Right, it's a 65% bonus damage on top of like Warlocks who are already like, you know, huge crit damage. stuff like that. You know, 10% here, getting a cool conflagration and stuff like that. So this sounds like giga, like single target pump, I'm gonna be honest. Demonic Grace, search with foul energy, increasing your pets and your own dodge chance by 30% and your chance to critically strike with all attacks by 30. Again, this is probably to support the tank build. Getting 30% dodge chance, you know, pretty good. 6 seconds kind of short, kind of depends on the cooldown. I'm guessing this is maybe 20 to 30 second cooldown. If this is a minute, this is terrible in my opinion. The only good thing would be if you're like a Destruction Warlock, you can cast this to get higher crit to really get those critical Chaos Bolts, but then you have to give up Incinerate, which you're probably not going to do. So, I don't know. This looks kind of mid. If the cooldown is like 20 to 30, this is pretty good, because then it's just like active mitigation. And I guess, you know, maybe you can combine it here, because then you have 10% crit here, 30% crit here, and then you have, because Searing Pain becomes instant, you have another 10% here. So then you're looking at 50% crit baseline. Right? Getting that with Ruin, you know, that might start, you know, the pieces might start falling together with this build a bit. If you don't want Master Channeler, at least. Demonic Pact, your demons crits, apply Demonic Pact, which basically increases their spell damage and spell healing. Yeah. This is just kind of like your passive, you know, whoopity-doo. I think this is also, like we talked earlier about the way where Blizzard is trying to kind of equalize the factions. This might again be that one. Do Shamans already have like one of those totems for spellcasters, or is that only in the future? Where they get the Totem of Wrath, I think I'm thinking about. Maybe that's TBC. Maybe I got my expansions mixed up, but it might be that they try to kind of equalize shaman abilities in that way. Let me quickly take a look if they get anything useful. Yeah, this one, right? No. I thought this one also gave like fire spell damage or something. No, I guess that's all in future expansions. So never mind, we don't really get anything on shamans regarding spells. So yeah, this is just free spell damage. I think this is kind of like your brain dead option, and if you play Demo, but I don't know. Yeah, I guess if you play Demo and you don't use Incinerate or Everlasting Affliction, but I don't know, it looks kind of mid. It might level, like it might scale pretty well perhaps, to the point where you're like, well, we need a Warlock because it's just so damn powerful. Because it does buff for 45 seconds, so that's pretty good. So I don't know, it's kind of like an... these talents are hard to place in my opinion, because you're kind of like, well, you're buffing your pets, but can you really buff them enough to kind of compete with like the disgusting destruction damage that's going to come out with these talents, right? Like, what is really the end goal with this when you can just play Incinerate and play like Lake of Fire and Chaos Bolt, right? So I don't know, but you know, a little bit more supportive. I'm gonna skip over this for a second and just talk about these other ones to wrap them up. Shadowbolt Volley. This basically turns Shadowbolt into Chain Lightning. It hits 5 targets with a 10-yard chain distance, but for 20 reduced damage. I don't think this 20 reduced damage is going to be that much of an issue. I assume this also scales up over time to not just be 20 at endgame. I think at level 25 it's 20. I'm not really sure. Let's just quickly go to 25. There we go. Which Shadowbolt do we have? We have Shadowbolt rank 4. Yeah, so it's about like a 1/5, right? It's about 20% decrease, right? Because you're hovering around 100 damage, you reduce it by 20. So we can say like, all right, your Shadowbolt does like 20% less damage. And we're just going to assume that this scales into endgame as well. Because otherwise this is like a completely ignorable amount of damage reduction. But let's say 20% reduced damage. Pretty good in my opinion, pretty good. It's probably the easiest AoE I've seen, right? You just spam Shadowbolt, and this is basically to counteract whatever destruction is getting, right? Because this looks to be themed more towards Affliction. Especially now that Incinerate is in the game, right? Because normally Destruction would cast Shadowbolt, but I think they're going to switch over to Incinerate. So yeah, this will be nice, especially with the Nightfall procs, you know, if you get some corruptions going on. Now, one thing that might work is if you combine these, and maybe that is the intention, that you apply corruption to a bunch of people, and then when Shadow Bolt volleys, that it refreshes all of them, right? That could be the intended play here. That would make Everlasting Affliction like kind of desperately reliant on Shadow Bolt volley. But hey, it's fun to combine these things, I guess. So having like permanent 5 corruptions rolling could be good. It kind of depends if the mobs last that long, right? Because if you're spending 5 global cooldowns to get corruption on everybody, I'm not sure if that's worth your time, right? But it remains to be seen. But at least if it works like this, or if, you know, it would be kind of sad if this only affects the main target. But if it works with Shadow Bolt volley, then, you know, it's a pretty cool interaction. Other than that, nice Affliction AoE. Chaos Bolt, already kind of went over this. The most interesting part about this is that it's actually not a guaranteed crit. It's actually a guaranteed hit. So I'm not sure if that's a typo or... because I think they would call it critically strikes, right? Do they call it with Shaman? Let's see. Allows always deal a critical strike. Yeah, so the wording, it just always hits and it cannot be resisted. But more importantly, its knowledge causes all your fire spells to pierce through absorption effect. Again, this makes Destro Warlock such a menace, I would imagine, when you cannot, you know... Like, does this go through Ice Block, right? Because I know it goes through Bubble, but I think it also goes through Ice Block then, right? That would be pretty interesting, right? You just immolate and then hit him with a big Conflagrate, maybe even hit him with a Shadow Burn. Oh, well, actually, this is Shadow damage, never mind. But, yeah, hit him with those Incinerates, hit him with the Chaos Bolt, hit him with the Conflag. Just straight through your immunities. Because I think back in the day, in Wrath the Lich King and stuff, it only affects Chaos Bolt itself, right? Not other spells. Yeah, it itself pierces, but this one allows all of your other spells to also pierce, which is interesting. I do wonder if this counts the Imp Fireball, because it says all your fire spells. Now, do we consider Imp's Firebolt one of your spells or one of the Imp's spells, right? It's only like, it's a pretty niche thing, but it's interesting to find out. Then we have Haunt. I think this is the same Haunt that you have in Wrath the Lich King, which is just like you deal shadow damage and then people take bonus damage and then the Haunt returns and heals you for the bonus damage. Or heals you for all the damage it dealt. Yeah, I mean, Haunt is Haunt. It's, for a while it has been a pretty core part of Affliction. I have never been the greatest fan of Haunt, but, you know, if people like Haunt, there it is. But yeah, I'm way more excited about Shadow Bolt Volley than I am about Haunt, I'm gonna be honest. Alright, so, Metamorphosis. This was in the game for a very short amount of time during Cataclysm, I want to say, where they had Glyph of the Dark Apostle. I'm not entirely sure if that's what it was called. But yeah, it basically gave you Warlock tanking, and they've just brought that back in a big way. So it gives you the permanent shapeshift into a demon, giving you 500% armor. Giving you the crit resistance, of course, giving you the threat increase, and increasing the mana gain from life tap by 100%. All very good stuff. Now for the more bonkers stuff is that it augments your abilities. It makes Searing Pain instant. Shadow Bolt becomes a melee cleave up to 3 targets with a 6-second cooldown. Curse of Recklessness is your taunt. And you get Demon Charge, which is like just like a warrior charge, I think, or like a leap, and you get Demonic Howl. Again, rogues just get absolutely blasted by how much value this one talent offers, right? This offers all the rogue offers plus more. You get your defenses, you get your mana issues solved, you have instant cast high threat abilities, right? Because Searing Pain by its nature is a high threat ability, right here, causes a high amount of threat. Now we've already all gone over the fact that with Demonic Grace, Demonic Tactics, and with the supporting talents, you can get a pretty high crit on this, which also is benefiting from Ruin. So a lot of things, right? Also 5% or like, yeah, 10% fire damage. Also gives you this Aftermath, right? Which is going to be disgusting. So, you know, Warlocks are eating good. Warlocks are eating very good with instant Searing Pains. That's honestly one of the things that blows my mind the most. Just instant Searing Pains. Especially in PvP, man. Like, I cannot I think this is going to be pretty broken, I'm going to be honest, because you're going to be walking around with, I would assume, right, if you want to do a 1v1 against a Warlock, you have to go through Siphon Life Healing, you have to go through Drain Life Healing, then you have to deal with instant Searing Pains, right, so you can never interrupt it. They're just going to be blasting you with this damage that has a high chance to crit. Shadow Bolt becomes Shadow Cleave, right? Very nice to just instantly establish aggro. And just the fact that you can tap target Searing Pain with like no strings attached means that Warlocks are, if not the best threat generators, like I would imagine that Warlocks become just the best on threat. I think maybe, because I know that like Feral Druid has some wonky interactions with how Maul gets multiplied by the Bear modifier. That makes them like insanely good at single target threat. Maybe they still beat Warlocks. But in general, I think the Warlock being able to have an AoE taunt, a single target taunt, and an instant cast ranged high threat ability that deals significant damage, right? Because it has good crit chance and it has a 100% crit multiplier. It sounds crazy. Sounds crazy. Curse of Wreck being your taunt is kind of funny because Curse of Wreck does give them more attack power, which kind of works adversely to being a tank, right? But in general, you don't really need your taunt that often, so, you know, maybe it doesn't matter. So, Warlock tanking, they look cool. They probably are pretty cool. You get your dodge here. Yeah, sounds absolutely busted, I'm gonna be honest. And in PvP, I think most classes will just outright lose. I'm gonna be honest. I think most classes are just done. Because, like, getting 100% increased mana from life tap, and you can also just add like 20% mana here, combined with the fact that you have Siphon Life and Master Channeler rolling permanently that are uninterruptible and by most classes undispellable, against someone who's getting 500% armor, gets 30% dodge, can spam instant cast fire abilities that do like decent damage. Like, damn, how are you supposed to beat this? I'm gonna be honest, because they can cast Curse of Weakness on you. Because, like, you're not using any of your curses, right? Like, the Curse of Recklessness is for a taunt, but in PvP you don't need a taunt. I don't know how you're supposed to deal with this, right? As a caster, you have a little bit more of a, you know, because they don't really get any magic resistance here. And it isn't until later expansions that Warlocks get, like, significant magic protection, right? Because then I'm thinking like TBC and REF, they get like a lot more options for magic protection. They don't really have that here. So yeah, I think any melee class and probably hunters as well are just gone, right? Just don't stand a chance with that much armor on a tank that can heal themselves easily, right? You apply Curse of Elements, right? You can't even protect yourself, right? Reduce fire resistance, increase fire damage taken, right? So they just hit you with the Curse of Elements and they go haywire on you. Yeah, I guess they do have Shadow Ward. Do they have like a Flame Ward kind of deal? Maybe they have a Flame Ward, but like, yeah, I don't, you have this thing, I guess. Not sure if anybody uses that because I think they're equipped in offhand. Now, as for which talent tree you want to go into, I think, in my honest opinion, you want to go Affliction. You definitely do not want to go Demonology, I'm thinking. You might want to go for Master Demonologist, perhaps, to get those resistances, especially late game, right? Getting like 60 resistances and everything might be nice. And kind of sharing your burden with, like, a Voidwalker doesn't really add much, so you might want to go with an Imp or with a Fell Hunter. But yeah, you can't go with an Imp because that reduces your threat. So you're going to go... Like, a Voidwalker gives you physical protection and a Fell Hunter gives you magical protection. So you're going to probably go with one of those. And then you can Soul Link. I'm not sure if your demon is going to survive you actively tanking. I'm going to be honest. I think your demon might die real quick. And I'm not sure you're going to go Demonology anyway. Because, like, Fell Domination doesn't actually remove the cast time. It just reduces it to like 4.5 seconds, I think. Which you're never going to cast if you're tanking. Let's see, actually reduces by 4 more seconds. So you're going to get pretty close to instants, perhaps. But I'm not sure still. I'm not sure if you want to do this. It is nice to have Sacrifice as a Warlock tank, right? Especially in PvP, you can just passively have your Voidwalker next to you and just use your Sacrifice shield whenever. And then, you know, Fell Domination, another one. Demonic Sacrifice, I've looked at this. I'm not sure how useful this is compared to what you lose, right? The health increase, the 3% of total health every 4 seconds, sounds just a tad bit too weak. Same for the mana restore. The fire damage or shadow increase could be pretty interesting. But yeah, I think there's more benefit to having a pet than not having a pet, especially because it basically nullifies this entire talent tree by using this. And of course Soul Link again. In PvP, very strong, right? Just makes you more unkillable. But other than that, I think you want Demonic Embrace for sure. More health. But other than that, I don't really see much point going in this tree. I would much rather go into this tree for Improved Train Life, for Siphon Life, and for Shadow Mastery. Or I would go into Destruction, especially for PvP, getting this one, right? 10% chance for 5-second days, very nice. Right, grabbing this one for that increased crit damage. And honestly, like, I'm not sure if you can make this work. I'm just gonna press some random stuff just to see how far I get. Can you get Siphon Life? Yep. And then you can, yeah. So you can at least get Siphon Life. You can't get Shadow Mastery, but going Siphon Life into Ruin, together with like Master Channeler and going full tank, this sounds like a pretty competent PvP build, I'm gonna be honest. Alright, you can have a bunch of different toys here. Overall, Warlocks are already pretty strong and only are going to get stronger. I am very scared for anybody who has to PvP against this. I'm gonna be honest, I feel sorry for all of you. Good luck. And that brings us to the last contender on our list, Warriors. So overall, the warrior skills are actually somewhat boring. They're kind of tame, but I don't mind actually, because warrior is already, I would always say, like in classic, I always feel like warriors were a little bit ahead in design, right? Same with warlock. Warlock and warrior both just have so many more tools than a lot of other classes do, right? Especially looking at, for example, the fact that they have like recklessness, retaliation, and shield wall as kind of like a shared cooldown. It's almost like a Final Fantasy limit break. Stuff like that was pretty advanced. I'm gonna be honest, that's like some pretty advanced design compared to how rudimentary some other classes feel. Pretty cool flavor. So warrior already has like a lot of stuff. The problem with warrior has always been that like they are very limited by their no self-healing and limited mobility, right? That's always been what holds them back, because they have last stand, right? This is a pretty modern ability actually. Right, no other character has stuff like this this early. Right, concussive blow, just having a 5-second stun in your talent tree, easy peasy. They have a lot of cool stuff that's hard to use sometimes. Also with like Death Wish, right, having a DPS cooldown at all, right? Most classes don't even have those. So yeah, I'm actually not too upset that warrior gets some basic stuff, but let's get into it. So Flagellation. This is already something that is incredibly powerful in my opinion, just being able to kind of at will get 25% bonus physical damage. Blood Rage and Berserker Rage, right? These are pretty basic abilities, right? 30-second cooldown on here. And where is Blood Rage? Blood Rage is 1 minute. So yeah, I've never tested it, but like you can cast Berserker Rage and then switch to battle stance or defensive stance. I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if it falls off. But still, just being able to just pop 25% physical damage bonus whenever you want with 2 different abilities is pretty good in my opinion. It's very good actually. And it also completely mocks these 2 options. Like Blood Frenzy, I don't know what's going on with this, man. Each time you deal bleed damage, you gain 3 rates. Like, what is this, man? What is this? Because the only bleeds you have are Rend and Deep Wounds. Rend ticks like once every 3 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. So like this is like basically 1 rage per second, and who cares, right? Who cares? Because this just means that like every 30 seconds you get like a free Mortal Strike, basically. That's nothing. Deep Wounds, I'm not sure how many times Deep Wounds ticks. I would assume it's the same, because most things are kind of like 3 seconds-ish. So it's still like kind of whatever. I could see this work if in the future they add different bleeds. Until then, this gets absolutely destroyed by Flagellation, I would imagine. Raging Blow. I'm not sure if Raging Blow beats Flagellation. But it is pretty interesting, right? Because it deals 100% weapon damage. It doesn't say offhand, right? Because Raging Blow, I think, in its first inception was offhand damage, if I'm not mistaken. Nowadays, it's main hand, but back in the day, I think it used to be offhand. But this seems to be just like an extra weapon strike. And it probably serves more to be kind of like a slam replacement. It might also be cheaper, I'm not sure. Slam is pretty cheap, but it has a cast time, so it might save you those talent points. Can only be used while Enraged, Berserker Rage, or Blood Rage active. So again, kind of like the same with Flagellation, except the only difference is you can activate it through this. This is only activatable in PvP, alright? So because you need to get crit. Normally as a warrior you're not supposed to get hit, but in PvP you can use this, I guess. But it mostly comes down to Berserker Rage and Blood Rage, and ultimately it means is 25% physical damage stronger or is a couple of Raging Blows stronger, right? Especially because it's only when they are active. Berserker Rage is 10 seconds, Blood Rage is also 10 seconds. So that's 2 seconds less than Flagellation is active for, and Flagellation works with a lot of other stuff and doesn't actually increase the amount of global cooldowns you're spending. So this is just going to come down to math. But yeah, good options, right? And then we have the creme de la creme for warriors, Warbringer. This is just, I love Warbringer. I love Warbringer. It just opens up warrior, right? Like whenever this came into the game, nobody ever looked back. Warbringer just makes the warrior so much more mobile. Not being able to charge in combat, it's like a balancing pin, right? It does help balance because your combat charge is called intercept, but intercept has a 30-second cooldown if it's untalented, and it costs rage, where its charge is like 15 seconds, right? And it generates rage, so charge is far superior to intercept, and that's on purpose, of course. But Warbringer is the single most transformative trait you can get this entire season of Discovery, and for good reason, right? Because it just, especially in PvP, it just changes how warrior works by such a significant margin. It changes a lot of the value of these talents, right? It also changes the worth of tactical mastery, because now you can just stay in berserker stance or defensive stance and use it. So yeah, I love this. I think it's great. Actually, a fun anecdote is that back in Wrath of the Lich King, when I used to PvP as a little kiddo, I used to go Warbringer all the way here, and then I would go two-handed into arms. I wouldn't get very far, but I would focus on Heroic Strike instead of Mortal Strike. Not going to say it was good, but it was fun. Anyway, so yeah, big fan, big fan. So this is the Warrior AoE I alluded to earlier. This means that Thunderclap is now usable in any stance. This is very important because I have noticed that people don't really realize that Thunderclap does not have an initial threat modifier. So I remember watching when the initial classic beta came out in, I think, 2018 or something. I remember like watching Asmon stream, and he was tanking and people were shouting at him to use Thunderclap, and I'm like, no, don't use Thunderclap. It's not good because it does not have a threat modifier, and it can only be used in battle stance. So that means you do pitiful AoE damage that has no threat modifiers attached to it. Why would you use this for 20 rage, right? So it only makes sense that they add this, because now you can use it in defensive stance, and the damage you deal actually gets modified by the defensive stance threat increase and by this talent's Defiance to increase it even further if you want to. So this just turns, right, Warbringer and Furious Thunder just kind of make Prot Warrior complete, in my opinion, right? This is literally all they need, and then they're just complete. Because it gives them an easy way to just, if they want to stay in defensive stance, they stay in, they charge in, do a Thunderclap, do a Demo Shout, now you're set for life, right? The enemies have, you know, like it increases their time between attacks by 6%. That's just like, you know, how do you call it? The cherry on the cake, I guess. Cherry on the whatever. Yep, you decrease their attack speed, you decrease their attack power. You have two forms of AoE threat generation, and then you can just swap. Then you can just kind of go into Sunder Armor spamming. So yeah, fantastic addition. It's really basic, right? But it means so much for Warrior. So together with Warbringer, they're not entirely new, but they are very welcome. Then Consumed by Rage. I'm a little bit confused about how this one is supposed to work, because from the sounds of it, it means that once you hit 80 Rage, your next 12 attacks, or whenever 12 seconds pass, you will deal 25% melee damage, right? Now, what I am noticing is that they say it enrages you, so I assume this works together with Raging Blow. Now, this might tip the scales in Raging Blow's favor, as opposed to Flagellation. I also wonder if Raging Blow is one-handed only or two-hander, because if it is with a two-hander, then this is going to be a pretty juicy combo, especially when combined with something like Endless Rage, which just gives you a lot more rage. So a lot of ifs, but yeah, that's what it reads to me. It does feel kind of awkward to just charge in. Like, I think warriors on their opener, if they have improved charge, they generate like some 20-ish rage, and then the first auto attack probably generates like 12-ish rage, I think. So you start with 32 after like the first auto attack. I'm thinking, right? I don't have these numbers ready, but it feels kind of awkward to just stand there, not press anything to try and activate this. But other than that, yeah, it looks pretty good. I'm not sure if it's... Yeah, because this is a different enrage. And this is also a melee crit, yeah. So I was wondering if there were any other interactions with enrage, but those things kind of come in Wrath of the Lich King and stuff, because I don't think they have any other enrage mechanics here. But yeah, if Consumed by Rage can activate Raging Blow, that's very welcome. Other than that, yeah, looks good. It's a solid DPS increase, especially for Fury. And then for arms, we have Frenzied Assault, and this basically just gives you 20% attack speed when wielding a two-handed weapon. So yeah, this is just very welcome, right? It's 20% attack speed, it's super cool. It's kind of a boring talent, but again, the functionality difference is huge, because more attack speed means that your weapon effects trigger more. It means that you get more dice rolls of like sword spec, of mace spec, right? You get to trigger these things more often, you get to trigger whatever is on your weapon more often, and you get more rage. It also means that your heroic strikes are going to feel slightly more snappier. So overall, boring talent, but functionally very useful. It's kind of the theme of Warrior all around, right? Like Warbringer, Furious Thunder, Frenzied Assault, these are all kind of like, yeah, you know, they're not super flashy, but they just improve the solid foundation that is Warrior by a lot. All right, last row. Victory Rush. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Whenever you kill an enemy, or whenever you kill an NPC or player, you get to use this within 20 seconds to deal a bunch of damage and to heal you for 10%. I hope this increases over level, because 10% does not sound very attractive. I'm going to be honest. 10% is not a lot, especially given the other very competitive options on this list. I am very much not impressed by how much they're getting from this. I just quickly want to check what it is in Wrath of the Lich King, because maybe this is like because I know that like it gets better because they realize it sucks. So I just want to see if they, let's see, Victory Rush. Oh, it doesn't even heal here at all. Never mind, it doesn't even heal at all. They have like glyph? No, okay, never mind. So it doesn't even heal at all. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think this is weak. I think it's very weak. It's like, even for leveling, it's not even that interesting, right? Because if you need this 10%, then you probably need to eat anyway, right? Because you're at like 40% health or something. I don't think this is enough to keep you going. Like, either you are already fine, or you need to eat anyway. I think there's a weird middle ground where you would use Victory Rush. So, like, even saying it's a leveling talent isn't entirely true. Like, yeah, it's, like, nice. What I would have loved to see, especially given the very competitive nature of these other talents, is Impending Victory, which basically says, hey, it's a 10 rage, 30-second cooldown. You deal a little bit of damage, you heal for like maybe 15%, 20% max HP, and whenever you get a kill, it resets the cooldown. That's what I would have liked to see, because I think that gives warriors the edge that they need, especially when it comes to tanking, right? Where almost every other tank except Rogue has some form of healing, right? Shamans have like, or let's start with Paladin, right? Paladin has multitudes of ways to heal themselves. Druids have like Frenzy's Rejuve. They can kind of kite and then apply Regrowth or apply Rejuve to themselves, and now in the future also Life Bloom if they wish. They have these different healing over time effects. They have Frenzied Rejuve, as I mentioned before. Then we have Shamans, right? Shamans always have Healing Stream Totem. And they can cast stuff like, they can also like do an Earthbind Totem, start kiting, heal themselves up with Lesser Healing Wave. And Rogue is, again, the only one that's the outlier here. And Warrior is also an outlier. Now, I know that Warriors are not really supposed to be healers, right? That's kind of always been the Warrior thing. It's like not self-healing, even though in retail they do self-heal quite a lot ever since Legion. But yeah, I don't know. I think Victory Rush is just way too weak. I would have liked to see Impending Victory, because this ability is completely useless on bosses. This is almost completely useless in PvP. This is almost only used for leveling, and even then it's way too weak. So I don't know. I would like to see it changed. Endless Rage. I think this is this Wrath the Lich King capstone? No, it's TBC capstone. Yeah, Endless Rage. So yeah, it's Endless Rage. What do you want to know? It's just more rage, especially Frenzied Assault together with Endless Rage, right? Faster auto attacks that generate more rage. Very nice. It's also very good in combination with Consumed by Rage, right? Because more rage means faster consumed by rage. Very natural synergy between Consumed, Endless Rage, and Raging Blow going on here. Always like to see that interconnected synergy stuff, right? We saw it with the beautiful complementary nature of these skills. So too, right? Same with the Warlock, right? You get Lake of Fire, Incinerate, Chaos Bolt. I love synergies, and Raging Blow, Consumed by Rage, Endless Rage seems to be very, the Rage trio. Devastate, pretty simple stuff, right? It just gives Protection Warrior some more single target threat. It empowers your Sunder Armor to now also deal weapon damage based per application. Yeah, good stuff. Single-Minded Fury, I actually like this a lot. Gives you some more dual wield damage. And it actually gives you movement speed. Now that, in my opinion, is way more interesting than the damage. Because movement speed in vanilla matters quite a lot. Because mobility is way more limited than it is in retail, right? In retail, there's multitudes of ways to get movement speed. In retail, there is not. I remember people talking about Pursuit of Justice actually being somewhat powerful, right? Because it gives you 8% movement speed. That is enough to chase people down sometimes. Especially if you're up against something like a Mage and stuff, right? Single-Minded Fury together with Warbringer makes warriors very sticky, right? It makes it very hard to get rid of warriors. Because they will be walking at you faster than you can walk away. I'm not sure like if they have the boots enchant, if that overrides, because I think the boots enchant is also 8%, right? So this is even faster than the boots enchant. But yeah, and warriors can break movement impairing effects, right? And then as an addition, they can kind of just either do like Frenzied Assault, or, well, you wouldn't do Frenzied Assault when you're dual wielding, but I guess Consumed by Rage. Like, if you take Warbringer Single-Minded, I'm not really sure what you want here. I guess Raging Blow, Consumed by Rage, Single-Minded Fury, stuff like... Yeah, no. Actually, yeah, you would Warbringer, Consumed by Rage. I don't know, right? Consumed by Rage kind of seems weak without Endless Rage or Raging Blow. So if you go Warbringer, Single-Minded, I'm not sure what you would want in this middle row. Maybe it's interesting for like Fury dual wield tanking. But I think that's going to disappear with the... with Devastate on the horizon. So yeah, it's a little bit... with the stark competition again from like Endless Rage and Devastate, it's hard to place this one, but they are solid bonuses, right? Especially if you're like a raiding, if you are more of a raiding warrior, right? Raging Blow, Consumed by Rage, Single-Minded Fury, right? That definitely works. So yeah, nice to have. Quick Strike, this is basically just a Heroic Strike replacement that is instant instead of on your next hit. That is actually massive if you think about it, because Heroic Strike not only costs rage, but it also takes away the ability to generate rage from that attack, right? Because the attack that becomes a Heroic Strike does not generate rage itself. So by splitting Heroic Strike, right, taking that damage away from it, you basically give Arms Warriors specifically, because I don't think Fury Warriors will care about this, but Arms Warriors specifically, oh yeah, it's two-handed weapon, yeah. Yeah, you just give them way more options, especially because Heroic Strike is a high threat ability, so using it on a boss might be risky. So you can reduce it with Heroic Strike. It says it benefits from all the things that trigger from Heroic Strike. That's basically nothing except this one talent. But there's probably some tier set bonuses that might work with it. But other than that, it doesn't actually, there's actually nothing in this tree that works with Heroic Strike specifically. It's only this one. But yeah, it basically just means that Arms Warriors, you know, you don't have to use Slam, you don't have to use any other things. You can just use Mortal Strike, Overpower, Rend, and Quick Strike. Well, you can't really use Overpower because you don't have Taste for Blood, but like, if you're PvPing, you can. So Quick Strike, kind of useful. I'm not sure how it stacks up in terms of damage, because it doesn't deal weapon damage, right? It says a melee attack, a reckless instant melee attack with your two-handed weapon, dealing 49 to 81 physical damage. So I'm going to assume that they kind of calculated to be on par with Heroic Strike. But Heroic Strike, of course, adds that melee damage and increases it by 21. So that melee damage is kind of like, you were going to do that anyway, right? So this doesn't actually matter that much. It's basically only this 21. So I guess if the rage is equal, then this is just a strict upgrade. I'm trying to see if, because it starts at 49, right? Is there anything? So yeah, like around the 25 bracket is when this comes in. So it might actually scale a lot harder than Heroic Strike does. And I'm not entirely sure how... let me quickly check Slam's damage numbers. Slam is here. 32. See also... Yeah, so it already seems pretty competitive with Slam by itself, so it's probably just meant as a Slam replacement that functions as Mortal Strike. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to assume it beats Endless Rage. I think Endless Rage is only used in combination with Consumed by Rage and then either Flagellations or Raging Blow. I think Arms Warriors that use Frenzied Assault will probably go towards Quick Strike instead. But I could be wrong. I haven't really min-maxed Warriors in raids, so perhaps I'm wrong about this. But overall, this is a simple talent. These are simple runes. They are not flashy, but they are brutally effective. And they give Warrior, who is already pretty well designed, some extra tools to play with. It gives them extra room, right, to kind of breathe and try out their other things, right? Their rage economy is improved significantly. Some of their wonky mechanics, like Slam being a castable ability and whatever, and Heroic Strike being on your artic, right? They replace all of that with things like Raging Blow, with things like Quick Strike. Having other burst options for PvP like Flagellations, having great tanking options with Warbringer and Furious Thunder, and Devastate, right? All around, these are very practical, not flashy, but very practical increases to Warrior. In the future, I would like, because some people are like complaining about Bladestorm. I don't know if I want Bladestorm. I think Bladestorm is a little bit too not classic. It doesn't feel like a classic ability, at least. I would not want to see Bladestorm. I would like to see some other interesting abilities, right? Maybe something that can augment these weapon specializations. That would be fun, right? I have no idea what that would look like. I will leave that to the designers. But having maybe a talent tree that improves swords, mace, axe, and polearm specialization, and basically gives them like additional gimmicks or additional DPS bonuses or whatever, that could be really cool. I would love to see a talent that plays on these things. I would also maybe something like, you know, maybe something with hit rate, right? Because Fury isn't quite great at hit rate. Maybe Titan's Grip in the future. Who knows? Again, yeah, Titan's Grip also kind of like maybe too modern. I don't know. But yeah, a lot to look forward to. And yeah, I guess that does it. We've been over all the classes. I think in general it's a little bit hit and miss. Some things I hope to see fixed, like for example Serpent Spread Carve. And things like using traps and stuff. Yeah, and otherwise, yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag of excitement and not, right? Like, rogues are very exciting. Priests are not very exciting, in my opinion. Paladins are super exciting. Mages are pretty exciting with all the new toys they're getting. Druids, I like many of the additions of Druids. I'm also questioning some others. But especially that Fury of Stormrage and Wild Strikes is going to feel great, I imagine. Rogue tanks still kind of, you know, iffy. Shaman tanks, super hype. And of course, all these Warlock toys that they're getting, they're going to have a lot of fun with. And Warbringer for Warriors can never complain about that. So overall, very interested to see. I'm also very interested to see how they're going to expand on this with more slots in the future. But yeah, those were my thoughts about these runes. So thank you for watching and have a great day.